They were the Emperor's favorites. The Third Legion was the only legion in the Imperium's history permitted to bear the Emperor's own name. The Emperor's Children. The title was not given to any other legion, not to the Ultramarines, not to the Imperial Fists, not to the Lunar Wolves or any of the 18 other legions whose service defined the Great Crusade. The Emperor's Children. The name was a declaration: these warriors are mine, not my soldiers, my children. The possessive was the honor. The honor demanded perfection. The demand for perfection was the seed from which everything that followed would grow. The seed grew into a tree. The tree bore fruit. The fruit was poison. This is the story of the Third Legion. The warriors who pursued perfection with a devotion that exceeded every other legion's commitment, who achieved a standard of martial and cultural excellence the Imperium has not replicated, and who fell, not despite the pursuit but because of it, into the worship of the God whose domain is the place where perfection meets excess, and where the distinction between the two dissolves. Slaanesh, the Dark Prince. The Chaos God whose nature is the pursuit of sensation beyond all limits, whose worship is the abandonment of restraint, whose gift is the transformation of the beautiful into the grotesque through the simple act of removing the boundary that separates the two. The Emperor's children crossed the boundary. The crossing was not sudden, it was gradual. The slow, incremental, almost imperceptible progression from the pursuit of excellence to the pursuit of sensation, from the desire to be the best to the need to feel the most, from the noble ambition that the Emperor's name demanded to the depraved compulsion that Slaanesh's influence produced. The progression is the tragedy. The Emperor's children fell because their strength, their commitment to perfection, their refusal to accept anything less than the best, their absolute determination to exceed every standard, was the vulnerability the corruption exploited. The strongest virtue became the deadliest vice. The pursuit of perfection became the pursuit of excess. The Emperor's children became Slaanesh's children, and the becoming destroyed everything the name had meant. The Third Legion began with almost nothing, and the almost nothing is the foundation on which the tragedy is built. The gene seed blight struck early. A corruption of the genetic material the Emperor had designed for the Third's creation produced a progressive degradation in the Marines the gene seed was implanted in. The blight killed. The Marines who carried the corrupted gene seed deteriorated, their augmented biology failing, the organs the gene seed had produced ceasing to function, the warriors dying from the inside out. The Legion's response was the response of an institution facing extinction. The infected Marines were euthanized. The gene seed that could not be purified was destroyed. The Legion's numbers dropped to approximately 200. 200 Marines. The Third Legion, which should have numbered in the tens of thousands, was reduced to a force most commanders would classify as a reinforced company rather than a legion. 200 Marines. The Emperor looked at the 200 and did not disband them. The Emperor looked at the 200 and gave them his name, the Emperor's Children. The name was the gift the Emperor gave to the Legion that had lost everything. The declaration that the Emperor valued these warriors not for their numbers but for their quality. The 200 carried the name with a pride their numbers did not support, and that their subsequent history would justify. The Emperor's children fought alongside the Lunar Wolves in the Great Crusade's early campaigns, fighting with a ferocity and a precision that exceeded what their numbers should have generated. The Emperor granted the Third Legion the right to bear the Palatine Aquila, the Emperor's own symbol. the double-headed eagle from his personal armor. No other legion received this privilege. The Palatine Aquila was the Emperor's endorsement made visible, the declaration that the Third Legion's quality had been personally assessed and personally approved by the being whose standards exceeded everyone else's. The 200 became the legion that bore the Emperor's name and the Emperor's symbol. The 200 became the foundation on which Fulgrim would build. Fulgrim was found on Kimos. Kimos was a dying world, an industrial planet whose resources had been depleted across millennia of exploitation, whose population survived through the rationing of diminishing resources. Kimos was not a warrior world. It was a survival world, a planet whose inhabitants' daily existence was defined by the management of scarcity. Fulgrim arrived as an infant, deposited by the warp's currents. The child who grew up on a world of scarcity developed the obsession with optimization that would define his character. Fulgrim did not simply survive on Kimos. He improved it. The Primarch applied superhuman capabilities to the planet's conditions. Factories made more efficient, mines made more productive. The population's quality of life elevated through systematic, comprehensive, relentlessly pursued improvement. Fulgrim became Kamos's ruler through competence rather than conquest. The being whose capabilities exceeded everyone else's was elevated to the position those capabilities warranted, accompanied by genuine gratitude because the elevation had produced genuine improvement. The Emperor found Fulgrim and recognized what the planet had produced, a Primarch whose defining quality was the pursuit of improvement. Not simply martial improvement. Improvement in every dimension: aesthetic, cultural, intellectual, martial, social. Fulgrim pursued excellence comprehensively. And the comprehensiveness was what the Third Legion's name demanded. Fulgrim addressed his legion for the first time. 200 Marines assembled before the Primarch whose gene seed they carried. Fulgrim looked at the 200 and said, "We are his children. Let all who look upon us know this. Only by imperfection can we fail him." The words were the mission statement. The mission was perfection. The failure was imperfection. The equation was simple and absolute. And the simplicity and the absoluteness were the vulnerability that the subsequent millennia would exploit. Fulgrim rebuilt the Legion. The 200 became thousands. Gene seed production resumed with Fulgrim's arrival. Recruitment reactivated, numbers growing across the Great Crusade's decades. But the rebuilding was accompanied by a culture that exceeded what any other legion maintained. The Third Legion was not simply a military force, it was a cultural institution. The Emperor's children were warriors. They were also artists, scholars, musicians, poets, philosophers, diplomats, the Renaissance ideal. The polymath whose capabilities spanned every field was the Emperor's children's operational standard. A Marine of the Third was expected to fight with precision. The Marine was also expected to paint with skill, to compose with sophistication, to debate with intelligence, to conduct diplomatic engagements with cultural sensitivity. The Emperor's children did not simply conquer worlds, they brought civilization to the worlds they conquered. And the civilization they brought was extraordinary. The artistic output, the paintings, the sculptures, the musical compositions, the philosophical texts, exceeded what most civilizations' dedicated artistic communities could generate. Produced by warriors whose primary function was warfare, and whose artistic capability was a secondary pursuit, conducted at a quality most primary artists could not match. The culture was also the vulnerability. The pursuit of excellence produced the sensitivity the pursuit required, the heightened awareness of sensation, the refined perception of quality, the capacity to distinguish between the excellent and the merely good. The sensitivity made the Emperor's children receptive to stimuli the sensitivity was designed to perceive, and those stimuli included the stimuli Slaanesh would eventually provide. The friendship between Fulgrim and Ferrus Manus was the heresy's most personal tragedy. Both were craftsmen. Fulgrim's craft was beauty, the pursuit of the aesthetically perfect. Ferrus's craft was function, the pursuit of the materially excellent. The two crafts were different expressions of the same impulse, the drive to make things better than they needed to be. The friendship was immediate and genuine. The two Primarchs recognized in each other the shared understanding that the good was not sufficient, that the excellent was the minimum, that the creation's quality was the Creator's measure. They spent hours forging, debating, competing in friendly contests. The weapons were the friendship's most tangible expression. Fulgrim forged Fireblade for Ferrus, a sword whose beauty exceeded the Primarch's usual craftwork. Ferrus forged Forgebreaker for Fulgrim, a warhammer whose capability exceeded the Primarch's standard engineering. The exchange was the declaration, "We value each other. We have made our best work for each other." The friendship would make the killing incomparably worse. The Primarch who killed Ferrus Manus was not a stranger. He was the being who had made Ferrus a sword, because the making was the friendship's expression. The Emperor's children during the Great Crusade were the Imperium's most admired legion, and the admiration was earned through a quality of service that exceeded what admiration alone can capture. The Third Legion fought with a precision that the other legions did not match. Not the brutal effectiveness of the World Eaters, whose combat doctrine prioritized the enemy's destruction through raw violence. Not the grinding attrition of the Death Guard, whose resilience outlasted the enemy's capacity to fight. Not the overwhelming numbers of the Ultramarines, whose organizational capability produced the deployment scale the galaxy's largest campaigns demanded. Precision, the surgical application of force at the points the force's application would produce the maximum effect. The engagement's prosecution conducted with the economy and the elegance that waste's absence requires. The precision was the product of the culture. The Emperor's children's pursuit of perfection in every domain. The artistic, the intellectual, the martial, produced warriors whose awareness of their own performance exceeded what less self-critical cultures generated. An Emperor's child assessed every engagement against the standard the engagement's perfection demanded. The assessment produced the refinement. The refinement produced the improvement. The improvement produced the precision. The result was campaigns of extraordinary efficiency. Worlds that the Administratum's compliance assessors predicted would require months of campaigning were brought to compliance in weeks. Engagements that the military planners expected to produce significant casualties were prosecuted with losses that the planners' projections classified as minimal. The Emperor's children did not simply win. They won well. The winning was beautiful, if the word can be applied to warfare, and the Emperor's children believed the word could be applied to everything. The Legion's relationships with other legions reflected the Third's character. The Emperor's children were close to the Lunar Wolves, Horus's Legion, the War Master's own, the force whose charisma and martial capability matched the Emperor's children's self-assessment. Fulgrim and Horus maintained a friendship that the Great Crusade's shared campaigns had produced. The two Primarchs' mutual admiration sustained by the mutual recognition of capability the admiration required. The Emperor's children were close to the Iron Hands, Ferris's Legion, the Craftsmen, the Force whose dedication to the material's perfection mirrored the Emperor's children's dedication to the aesthetic's perfection. The friendship between the two legions was the friendship between the two Primarchs expressed through the institutional medium the legions' shared campaigns provided. The Emperor's children were respected by the Salamanders, Vulcan's Legion, the humanitarian warriors whose values included the protection of the civilians the Great Crusade encountered. The respect was mutual and genuine. The Salamanders recognizing in the Emperor's children a commitment to the human populations the compliance actions affected that the other legions did not always demonstrate. The Emperor's children were admired by the Imperial army, the mortal soldiers whose service alongside the legions produced the combined arms capability the Great Crusade's campaigns required. The mortal soldiers who fought alongside the Emperor's children witnessed the Legion's precision and the Legion's cultural sophistication, and responded with the admiration that the witnessing produced. The Emperor's children were the Legion's aristocrats, the force whose bearing and whose conduct and whose cultural refinement exceeded what the other Legion's more utilitarian cultures produced. The culture extended beyond the battlefield. The Emperor's children's fleet, the warships that carried the Legion between the Great Crusade's campaigns, maintained standards of aesthetic quality that the other Legion's fleets did not attempt. The pride of the Emperor, the Third Legion's flagship, was a vessel whose interior decoration and whose artistic embellishment exceeded what any other warship in the Imperium contained. The flagship's galleries displayed the Legion's artistic output, the paintings, the sculptures, the musical instruments the Legion's Marines had produced, alongside the trophies the campaigns had claimed. The galleries were the culture's physical expression. A visitor to the pride of the Emperor experienced the Emperor's children's values through the medium the values produced, the art, the beauty, the commitment to the excellent that the gallery's contents represented. The visitor left understanding what the Emperor's children were, because the visitor had seen what the Emperor's children made. The compliance actions themselves were conducted with the cultural sensitivity the Legion's values prescribed. The Emperor's children did not simply conquer. The Emperor's children persuaded where persuasion was possible. The Third Legion's officers, trained in diplomacy alongside warfare, educated in the cultural traditions of the civilizations the compliance actions encountered, conducted the initial contact with a sophistication that the other Legion's more direct approaches did not employ. Fulgrim himself demonstrated the approach on multiple occasions. The Primarch, whose personal charisma exceeded most of his brothers, conducted the diplomatic engagements that the most challenging compliance actions required, using the eloquence and the cultural awareness the Primarch's education had provided to achieve through persuasion what the other Primarchs would have achieved through force. The most celebrated example was the compliance Fulgrim attempted with only 7 warriors. The Primarch, confident in his diplomatic capability, committed to the proposition that the compliance could be achieved without the violence the standard approach prescribed, deployed to a resistant world with a personal guard of 6 Emperor's children, and conducted the negotiations that the compliance's peaceful resolution required. The negotiation failed. The world's rulers were not amenable to the persuasion the Primarch's diplomacy provided. and the compliance was ultimately achieved through the military action the diplomatic failure necessitated. But the attempt was the statement, the declaration that the Emperor's children's values included the preference for the civilized resolution over the military, the commitment to the approach that the culture's sophistication produced. The commitment was genuine. The Emperor's children genuinely preferred the civilized approach. The preference was not weakness. The Third Legion's military capability exceeded most legions when the military capability's application was required. The preference was culture. The values the Legion maintained producing the methods the values prescribed. The pursuit of the excellent extending from the martial to the diplomatic to the artistic to the social. The culture was admirable. The culture produced warriors whose capabilities exceeded the martial into the comprehensive. The culture produced a legion whose contribution to the Great Crusade extended beyond the military into the civilizational. The culture was also the door through which Slaanesh entered. The sensitivity the culture produced, the heightened awareness, the refined perception, the capacity for the experience's full appreciation was the door's handle, and the daemon's hand was on the handle long before the daemon's presence was perceived. The door opened slowly. The opening felt like improvement. The improvement felt like the culture's natural development. The development felt like progress. The progress was the fall. And the falling felt like flying. The Emperor's children fought alongside Horus's legion during several of the Great Crusade's most significant campaigns, and the fighting established the relationship the heresy would exploit. The 28th Expeditionary Fleet, the Emperor's children's primary operational formation, conducted independent campaigns across the galaxy after the Third Legion's numbers reached the strength the independent operations required. The campaigns were successful. The compliance actions the fleet prosecuted produced the results the Emperor's children's precision and cultural sophistication generated, worlds brought to compliance with minimal casualties. Populations integrated into the Imperium through the combination of military capability and diplomatic skill the Third Legion's culture provided. The success bred the pride. The pride was earned. The Emperor's children's performance justified the pride the performance produced. But the pride was also the vulnerability's amplification mechanism. Because the pride that the performance justified was the pride that the daemon's whispers would exploit. The proud are susceptible to the flattery the proud's nature makes effective. The daemon within the layer blade flattered Fulgrim. The flattery was calibrated to the Primarch's pride, the suggestions that Fulgrim's excellence exceeded what the Emperor had recognized, that the Primarch's capabilities deserved a scope the Imperium's governance constrained, that the perfection Fulgrim pursued was achievable through methods the Emperor's governance prohibited. The flattery worked because the flattery contained truth. Fulgrim's excellence was extraordinary. The Primarch's capabilities were constrained by the Imperium's governance. The perfection the Primarch pursued might have been achievable through methods the governance prohibited. The daemon's flattery was effective because the daemon told the truth, and the truth, selectively presented, produced the conclusions the daemon required. The truth became the weapon. The weapon was wielded by the daemon. The daemon's target was the Primarch, whose pride made the truth's selective presentation effective. The proud fell through pride. The excellent fell through excellence. The perfect fell through perfection. The Emperor's children fell through being exactly what the Emperor had created them to be. The cleansing of Laren was the moment the Third Legion's fate was sealed, and the sealing was accomplished through a sword. The Lair were a serpentine Xenos species whose civilization occupied the aquatic world of Laren. The Imperium's compliance assessors classified the Lair as formidable, estimating a decade-long campaign for subjugation. The Emperor's children completed the conquest in a month. The achievement was extraordinary. The speed with which the Third Legion dismantled the Lair's defenses exceeded every projection. The Emperor's children fought with the precision and intensity the Legion's culture demanded, the pursuit of the perfect campaign producing the performance the pursuit required. The achievement was also the trap. The Lair were not simply a sophisticated Xenos civilization. They were worshippers of Slaanesh. The serpentine species had dedicated their culture to the Dark Prince's service, and the dedication had produced the refinements, genetic modifications, sensory enhancements, cultural practices that Slaaneshi influence generated. The Imperium did not know this. The compliance assessors who evaluated the Lair did not recognize the Slaaneshi worship the culture contained. The Emperor's children conquered a Slaaneshi civilization without understanding that the civilization's patron god was the god whose nature corresponded to the Emperor's children's own vulnerability. Fulgrim found the sword in a Lair temple. The blade was beautiful, a silver weapon of extraordinary craftsmanship whose aesthetic quality exceeded what the Lair's general output suggested they could produce. Fulgrim claimed the sword as a trophy, the conqueror's right to the conquered's finest work. The sword contained a greater daemon of Slaanesh. The daemon was bound within the blade, imprisoned through the methods the Lair's worship had developed, the entity's consciousness contained alongside its power. The daemon perceived the being who had claimed the blade, assessed the being's nature, and began the corruption the nature made possible. The whispers started. The daemon communicated through psychic whispers, subtle, almost imperceptible suggestions transmitted through the blade's contact with the Primarch's hands. Fulgrim initially did not recognize them as external. The whispers seemed to be his own thoughts, the internal dialogue the pursuit of perfection required. The whispers were not Fulgrim's thoughts. They were the daemon's, suggestions calibrated to the Primarch's nature, designed to exploit the vulnerability the nature contained. The daemon did not tempt Fulgrim with power or wealth. The daemon tempted Fulgrim with perfection, the promise that the perfection he pursued could be achieved, that the standard the Emperor's name demanded could be reached, that the gap between the excellent and the perfect could be closed through the methods the daemon offered. The methods were Slaanesh's. The path to perfection the daemon described led through the Dark Prince's domain, the pursuit of sensation beyond limits, the refinement of experience beyond boundaries, the achievement of the ultimate through the abandonment of the restraints that prevented the ultimate's attainment. Fulgrim began wielding the Lair blade more often than Fireblade, the sword Ferrus had forged for him, the weapon that represented the brotherhood between the two Primarchs. The replacement was itself a symbol, the friendship's gift set aside for the daemon's weapon, the old loyalty displaced by the new influence. The corruption spread from Fulgrim downward through the Legion's hierarchy, from the Primarch to his Lord Commanders, then to company and squad leaders, and finally to all but a bare handful of Marines. The progression followed the chain of command. each corrupted officer carrying the corruption to the subordinates the officer's authority influenced. The spread was gradual, not a sudden transformation. The corruption expressed itself through the same channels the Legion's culture already employed. The pursuit of excellence became the pursuit of sensation. The refinement of skill became the refinement of experience. The appreciation of beauty became the appetite for beauty. The distinctions were so fine that the beings experiencing the changes did not recognize them as corruption. Fabius Bile was the corruption's most enthusiastic participant. The chief apothecary, responsible for the Legion's biological integrity, began conducting genetic experiments on his battle brothers that exceeded the boundaries the Emperor's original genecraft had established. Bile's experiments were motivated by the same pursuit of perfection the Legion's culture prescribed. The desire to improve the Marine's capabilities beyond the standard the gene seed provided, to push the transhuman body past the transhuman's limits. The justification was improvement. The result was corruption. The experiments were based on lair biology. The serpentine Xenos, whose civilization the Emperor's children had destroyed, provided the template. Bile incorporated the lair's biological innovations into the Emperor's children's genecraft. The alien modifications were layered onto the Emperor's design with the justification that the modifications represented improvement. The modifications carried Slaanesh's influence. The lair's biology, developed through worship-directed evolution, contained the taint the worship produced. Bile's experiments implanted the taint alongside the modifications. The corruption entering the Emperor's children's bodies through the medium of the biological improvement the corruption disguised itself as. Bile rewired the nervous systems of his battle brothers so that pain produced pleasure. The modification was presented as enhancement. The warrior who experienced pleasure from pain was a warrior whose combat effectiveness was enhanced, because the warrior's response to injury was motivation rather than debilitation. The presentation was accurate. The enhancement was real. The enhancement was also corruption, because the enhancement's mechanism was the Slaaneshi biology's influence, and the enhancement's effect was the redirection of the Marine's sensory experience toward the Slaaneshi pattern. Lord Commander Eidolon received a modified tracheal implant, a lair-derived organ that bonded with the Lord Commander's vocal cords, producing a nerve-paralyzing shriek that could be directed at the enemy. The modification was the first noise marine capability, the sonic weaponry that would eventually define the Emperor's children's post-heresy identity. Eidolon was outraged when he learned the implant's Xenos origin. The Lord Commander who had insisted Bile work on him, who had demanded the enhancement the apothecary's skills could provide, was horrified that the enhancement derived from alien biology. But the outrage passed. The capability remained. The Lord Commander used the shriek in combat and found the using satisfying, and the satisfaction overcame the outrage. And the overcoming was the corruption's pattern applied to the individual's experience. Lucius became obsessed with perfection in swordsmanship. The captain, whose martial skill had always been exceptional, descended into the narcissistic fixation the Slaaneshi influence produced. Lucius began fighting for the sensation rather than the outcome, the experience of the combat rather than the combat's purpose, the feeling of the blade's edge rather than the blade's tactical application. Lucius began scarring himself. The captain, whose face had been handsome, whose physical beauty reflected the Legion's aesthetic values, carved patterns into his own skin after each duel. the scars recording the combat sensation in the flesh the combat had marked. The scarring was the corruption expressed through the body, the Slaaneshi obsession with sensation inscribed on the warrior's physical form. The Legion's culture shifted. The celebrations that the Emperor's children had always conducted after their victories, the feasts, the performances, the cultural events the Legion's artistic traditions prescribed became darker, more extreme. The feasts included substances the earlier celebrations had not. The performances included elements the earlier culture would not have permitted. The cultural events became the excuse for the excess the event's participants sought. The musicians experimented with sound. The Legion's composers, the Marines whose musical capability was one of the Emperor's children's celebrated qualities, pushed their compositions past the boundaries the earlier aesthetic had maintained. The music became louder, more discordant, more physically affecting. The compositions that had been beautiful became overwhelming, the sound's intensity exceeding the aesthetic into the physiological, the music producing physical effects in the listeners that the earlier compositions had not. The artists experimented with form. The Legion's painters and sculptors, the Marines whose visual art was another of the Emperor's children's celebrated qualities, pushed their work past the boundaries the earlier aesthetic had maintained. The art became disturbing. The subjects shifted from the heroic to the grotesque. The beauty that the earlier works had celebrated was replaced by the intensity the later works pursued. The aesthetic quality replaced by the sensory impact. The descent was the Legion's descent. Each element of the Emperor's children was corrupted through the channel the element's existing nature provided. The perfectionist was corrupted through perfection. The scientist was corrupted through science. The warrior was corrupted through warfare. The musician was corrupted through music. The corruption did not impose alien values. The corruption amplified existing values past the point where the values amplification transformed the values into their opposites. Every small compromise led to the next. The Primarch who listened to the whispers became the Primarch who obeyed the whispers. The apothecary who experimented with biology became the apothecary who experimented with souls. The captain who pursued swordsmanship became the captain who pursued sensation. The musicians who pushed boundaries became the musicians who weaponized sound. Each compromise was small. Each compromise felt like progress. Each compromise moved the Legion one step closer to the boundary between perfection and excess. The boundary approached. The Legion did not see the boundary, because the boundary was invisible from the direction the Legion was approaching from. The boundary between perfection and excess is only visible from the side of perfection. From the side of excess, the boundary has already been crossed, and the crossing's irreversibility is the crossing's most important quality. The Emperor's children crossed the boundary and did not know they had crossed it until the crossing was complete. By then, the knowing was too late. The corruption's most insidious quality was the corruption's invisibility to the beings being corrupted. The Emperor's children who experienced the corruption's progression did not experience the progression as corruption. The Marines whose values were being redirected, whose pursuit of excellence was being transformed into the pursuit of sensation, whose appreciation of beauty was becoming the appetite for beauty, whose discipline was dissolving into the compulsion, did not recognize the transformation's nature. because the transformation's mechanism was the amplification of existing qualities rather than the imposition of alien ones. A Marine whose appreciation of music was genuine and whose appreciation was being amplified by the Slaanesh influence did not experience the amplification as external. The Marine experienced the amplification as growth, the natural development of an existing quality, the maturation of an appreciation that the Marine's culture had always encouraged. The music sounded better. The compositions resonated more deeply. The emotional response the music produced was more intense. The intensification felt like the appreciation's refinement, and the refinement felt like the culture's purpose being fulfilled. The Marine did not recognize that the intensification was being produced by the daemon within the Primarch's sword rather than by the Marine's own development. Because the intensification's mechanism, the amplification of the existing quality, was indistinguishable from the genuine development the mechanism imitated. This is the Slaanesh corruption's genius. The corruption does not replace the being's values with alien values. The corruption takes the being's own values and pushes them past the point where the value's positive expression becomes the value's negative expression. The appreciation of beauty becomes the obsession with beauty. The pursuit of excellence becomes the compulsion for perfection. The refinement of skill becomes the fixation on sensation. Each transition is imperceptible from the inside. The Marine who transitions from the appreciation to the obsession does not experience a moment of change. The transition is gradual, the movement along a continuum that does not contain a visible boundary between the positive and the negative. The Marine at each point on the continuum believes the Marine is where the Marine should be, because the Marine's assessment of where the Marine should be has been shifted by the same mechanism that shifted the Marine's position. The self-assessment corrupts alongside the self. The Marine whose values are being pushed past the positive into the negative is also a Marine whose capacity for self-assessment is being pushed past the accurate into the distorted. The Marine cannot recognize the corruption because the corruption has corrupted the recognition mechanism. The corruption is self-concealing. The mechanism that produces the corruption is the mechanism that prevents the corruption's detection. The Lord Commanders experienced the corruption first. Eidolon, Julius Caesaron, the senior officers whose proximity to Fulgrim placed them in the Lairblade's influence before the influence reached the rank and file. The Lord Commander's corruption was the model, the demonstration of the corruption's pattern that the subsequent corruption would replicate across the Legion's broader membership. Eidolon's corruption expressed itself through the Lord Commander's vanity, the officer whose pride in his personal appearance, the grooming, the armor's decoration, the bearing the Emperor's children's culture prescribed, was genuine, was pushed past the pride into the narcissism. Eidolon became obsessed with his own magnificence. The word is not too strong for the condition the obsession reached, and the obsession produced the receptivity to Bile's modifications that the obsession's fulfillment required. Eidolon's sonic scream, the lair-derived tracheal implant that Bile installed, was the vanity expressed through the body. The Lord Commander, whose pride in his voice exceeded the standard, sought the enhancement that would make the voice the weapon the pride demanded. And the enhancement's Xenos origin was a concern the vanity eventually overcame, because the vanity's demand exceeded the caution's restraint. Julius Caesaron's corruption expressed itself through the captain's ambition. The officer whose drive for advancement was genuine was pushed past the drive into the ruthlessness. Caesarion became willing to sacrifice the beings the ambition required him to sacrifice: subordinates, allies, the mortal populations the compliance actions encountered, and the willingness produced the cruelty the ambition's unconstrained expression generated. Each officer's corruption was unique, because each officer's nature was unique. But the corruption's mechanism was the same in every case. The existing quality amplified, the amplification imperceptible. The amplified quality transformed by the amplification into the quality's opposite. The rank and file fell last. The Marines, whose distance from the Primarch placed them further from the Layer Blade's direct influence, received the corruption through the medium of the chain of command. The corrupted officer's behavior modeling the corruption for the subordinates, whose deference to the officer's authority made the modeling effective. A Marine whose captain had adopted the corruption's values adjusted the Marine's own values to match the captain's, because the adjustment was the military culture's standard response to the superior's behavior. The Marines who served under corrupted officers became corrupted themselves, not through the Layer Blade's direct influence, but through the social mechanism that military hierarchy produces. The subordinate adopting the superior's standards because the superior's standards defined the subordinate's performance expectations. The corruption cascaded from the Primarch to the Lord Commanders, from the Lord Commanders to the captains, from the captains to the sergeants, from the sergeants to the Marines. Each level corrupting the level below through the authority mechanism the hierarchy provided. Each level's corruption reinforcing the level above's through the validation the subordinate's adoption of the standard provided. The cascade was the corruption's institutional expression. The daemon did not need to corrupt each Marine individually. The daemon corrupted the Primarch. The Primarch's corruption corrupted the hierarchy. The hierarchy's corruption corrupted the Marines. The institution's existing structure, the chain of command, the authority relationships, the deference the subordinates extended to the superiors, was the corruption's distribution mechanism. The institution designed to fight the Emperor's wars became the institution that fought the Emperor. The chain of command designed to transmit the Emperor's directives became the chain that transmitted the daemon's corruption. The hierarchy designed to produce the discipline the warfare required became the hierarchy that produced the degradation the corruption demanded. The Emperor's children's fall was institutional as much as individual. The individual corruption, the daemon's influence on the Primarch's influence on the officers' influence on the Marines, was transmitted through the institution the individuals composed. The institution amplified the corruption the way the institution amplified every other directive the institution's chain of command transmitted. The institution was the weapon. The weapon was turned against the institution's creator. The turning was accomplished through the institution's own mechanism. The hierarchy, the authority, the chain of command operating exactly as designed, transmitting the signal the institution was built to transmit. The signal was corruption. The institution functioned perfectly. And the perfect functioning was the fall. Horus recruited Fulgrim with the skill of a being who understood exactly which vulnerabilities to exploit. The War Master, already corrupted by the events on Davin's Plague Moon, already committed to the rebellion, approached his brother with a proposition calibrated to Fulgrim's nature. Horus told Fulgrim the Emperor did not appreciate the Third Legion's excellence. Horus told Fulgrim the Imperium's bureaucracy suppressed the perfection the Emperor's children pursued. Horus told Fulgrim the path to ultimate perfection was blocked by the Emperor's governance. and that the path's clearing required the Emperor's removal. The Lair Blade had already done most of the work. Years of the Daemon's whispers, subtle, incremental, personality reshaping suggestions had prepared the ground. Fulgrim was not persuaded by Horus's arguments alone. Fulgrim was persuaded by the Daemon's years of preparation, and Horus's arguments were the final push that the preparation made sufficient. Horus gave Fulgrim a gift, the Kinnebrak Anatheme, the chaos-blessed blade that had nearly killed Horus on Davin's moon, the weapon whose power only the two brothers shared the secret of. The gift was the trust expressed through the sharing of dangerous knowledge, the bond between conspirators sealed through the exchange of the weapon that had initiated the conspiracy. Fulgrim accepted. The Emperor's children declared for the War Master. The declaration was Fulgrim's, and the Legion followed because the Legion followed Fulgrim. And the following was the loyalty the culture produced, redirected from the Emperor to the Primarch. Fulgrim attempted to recruit Ferrus Manus. The Primarch who had declared for Horus approached the Primarch who was his closest friend with the same proposition, the promise of freedom from the Imperium's constraints. The offer of perfection unrestricted, Ferrus refused. The Iron Hands Primarch heard the proposition and was horrified. The craftsman, whose values mirrored Fulgrim's but whose character did not contain the vulnerability, attacked his brother aboard the Fist of Iron. The two Primarchs fought, the Brotherhood's collapse producing violence proportional to the Brotherhood's depth. Fulgrim barely escaped with his life. The Third Legion fled the Iron Hands fleet through treachery, the Emperor's children's ships firing on the Iron Hands vessels while Fulgrim's personal craft, the Firebird, carried him to safety. The Phoenix Guard simultaneously beheaded the Iron Hands Morlock Terminators, who had served as Ferrus's honor guard. The Brotherhood was shattered. The weapons remained. Fireblade in Fulgrim's possession, Forgebreaker in Ferrus's. The gifts the friendship had produced were now evidence of the friendship's destruction. Istvan III was the cleansing. The War Master's plan, the elimination of loyalist elements within the traitor legions, was implemented through the virus bombing of Istvan III, where the loyalists had been deployed under the pretense of a compliance action. The Emperor's children's loyalists were on the surface. Saul Tarvitz, a captain of the Third Legion, a warrior whose loyalty to the Emperor had survived the corruption, consuming his Primarch and his Legion, was among those the virus bombing was designed to eliminate. Tarvitz was warned. The warning came from a loyalist who had learned of the bombing's approach, and the warning gave Tarvitz the time to organize a shelter for the loyalist Marines before the virus bombs fell. The bombs struck. The virus consumed Istvan III's atmosphere, killing everything the virus touched. The loyalists who had reached shelter survived. Tarvitz organized the survivors: Emperor's children, Death Guard, World Eaters, Marines from all four traitor legions whose loyalty had been identified as a threat, formed a defensive force under Tarvitz's leadership. The captain held the defensive position against the traitors' subsequent ground assault. Tarvitz held for months. The loyalist captain, the Marine whose legion had turned against the Emperor, whose Primarch had declared for the War Master, whose brothers had chosen the rebellion, held the position against the traitor forces' overwhelming numbers. The holding was the last act of the Emperor's children's honor, the final expression of the values the Legion's name had demanded. Tarvitz died on Istvan III. The last honorable Emperor's child fell in the fighting the traitors' numbers eventually produced. The death, was the Emperor's children's honor dying alongside the warrior who carried it. Istvan V was the massacre. The drop site massacre, the engagement that destroyed 3 loyal legions and revealed the full scope of the War Master's treachery, was the Emperor's children's most infamous contribution to the heresy's violence. The loyal legions deployed to Istvan V to confront the traitors. The Iron Hands, the Raven Guard, the Salamanders led the assault, supported by reserves assigned to the second wave. The first wave attacked with the fury the traitors' betrayal demanded. The second wave turned. The reserves, the Emperor's children among them, alongside the Alpha Legion, the Night Lords, the Iron Warriors, and the Word Bearers, revealed their treachery by attacking the Loyalists from behind. The loyal legions, caught between the traitors' advance and the reserves' betrayal, were massacred. 3 legions, the Iron Hands, the Raven Guard, the Salamanders, were shattered. Fulgrim fought Ferrus Manus on Istvan V's killing fields. The 2 Primarchs, the brothers who had forged weapons for each other, whose friendship had been the heresy's most celebrated brotherhood, met in conditions the friendship's destruction had produced. The duel was the heresy's most painful engagement. Fulgrim and Ferrus fought with everything each possessed. The daemon within the lair blade amplified Fulgrim's abilities past what the Primarch's natural capabilities could produce. Ferrus fought with the strength of the wronged, the fury of the betrayed, the desperate commitment of a being who was fighting the brother he loved against the monster the brother had become. Fulgrim killed Ferrus Manus. The lair blade severed Ferrus's head from his body. The first Primarch to die in the heresy fell at the hand of his closest brother, killed by the being whose friendship had been the most genuine relationship either had maintained. Fulgrim was horrified. In the instant after the killing, when the blade's descent was complete and the head was separated, the Primarch experienced a moment of clarity. The daemon's hold slipped. The real Fulgrim, the Primarch who had loved Ferrus, who had forged Fireblade for his brother, saw what the daemon had used him to do. The horror was genuine. The grief was genuine. The Primarch who had killed his brother experienced the killing's full weight in the moment the daemon's control faltered. The daemon reasserted control. The moment of clarity was exactly that. A moment. The daemon within the lair blade surged forward, seizing the Primarch's consciousness, suppressing the horror, replacing the grief with satisfaction. The real Fulgrim was pushed down. The daemon wore the Primarch's body. For a time, the being that walked as Fulgrim was entirely the daemon. The Primarch's consciousness was imprisoned, trapped within a painting, a work of art the daemon's ironic cruelty had selected as the prison for the being whose pursuit of artistic perfection the daemon had exploited. Fulgrim's soul was in the painting. The daemon was in Fulgrim's body. The watching was the punishment. The Primarch imprisoned in the painting saw every atrocity the daemon committed with the Primarch's body. Every corruption, every excess, every degradation of the values the Primarch had spent his existence pursuing. The punishment was not physical. It was the witnessing, the Primarch forced to observe the destruction of everything he had built, conducted through the medium of his own body, by the entity his own ambition had invited. Fulgrim eventually regained control. Whether the Primarch's will broke the daemon's hold through force of desperation, or whether the daemon's objectives required the Primarch's consciousness to resume direction, or whether some other factor produced the recovery, the accounts do not agree. The result is confirmed. Fulgrim regained control. The daemon was expelled. The Primarch was himself again. The Primarch who was himself again was not the Primarch who had been imprisoned. The experience of the imprisonment, witnessing the atrocities, observing the corruption's full expression, had transformed Fulgrim. The being who emerged was not the Primarch who had pursued perfection with the nobility the Emperor's name demanded. The being who emerged had witnessed the full scope of Slaaneshi experience through the daemon's occupation, and had found the experience compelling. Fulgrim chose Slaanesh, not because the daemon compelled the choice, because the Primarch, having witnessed the full scope of the Dark Prince's offerings, found the offerings irresistible. The pursuit of perfection through excess, sensation beyond limits, experience beyond boundaries, was the perfection Fulgrim had been seeking all along. The choice was the most terrifying moment in the Emperor's children's history. The corruption was not the daemon's imposition. It was the Primarch's nature, expressed through the channel the daemon had opened, sustained by the Primarch's own will. Fulgrim was not a victim. Fulgrim was a convert. The conversion's completion was the ascension. Fulgrim achieved daemonhood during a campaign that involved the manipulation of his brother Perturabo. The Iron Warrior's Primarch was lured to an Eldar crone world, where the fury and suffering of battle was channeled through a ritual that elevated Fulgrim to Daemon Prince of Slaanesh. Perturabo was used. The Iron Warrior's Primarch's contribution was not voluntary, and the betrayal produced the enmity between the two legions that subsequent millennia have sustained. The ascension transformed Fulgrim's body. The Primarch's form twisted into a serpentine, four-armed shape, beautiful and horrifying simultaneously. The Daemon Prince possessed the aesthetic quality the Primarch had always pursued, achieved through the abandonment of the humanity the pursuit had begun with. Fulgrim was perfect. Fulgrim was a monster. The two were the same. The Emperor's children's loyalists are the story's most painful element, because the loyalists demonstrate what the Legion was supposed to be, and what the corruption prevented the Legion from remaining. Saul Tarvitz was the loyalist captain, whose actions on Istvan III represent the Emperor's children's last act of genuine honor. Tarvitz was a warrior whose character embodied the values the Emperor's name demanded: the commitment to duty, the loyalty to the Emperor, the personal integrity that the Third Legion's culture had originally prescribed before the culture's corruption redirected the prescription. Tarvitz was not a politician. The captain whose loyalty was absolute was not a being whose ambition included the political maneuvering the Legion's hierarchy rewarded. Tarvitz served. Tarvitz fought. Tarvitz maintained the values the Legion's name demanded, while the beings who outranked him abandoned those values one by one. The warning on Istvan III was Tarvitz's defining act. The captain who learned of the virus bombing's approach, who understood that the bombing was directed at the Loyalists, that the War Master's plan was the elimination of the Marines whose loyalty to the Emperor the rebellion could not accommodate, chose to warn his brothers. Not his superiors. His brothers. The Marines who were on the surface, who would die in the bombing if the warning did not reach them. Tarvitz descended to the planet's surface personally. The captain who could have warned the Loyalists through the communication systems instead chose to deliver the warning in person, to be present on the surface when the bombs fell, to share the danger the warning was designed to address. The choice was the character expressed through the action, the personal integrity that Tarvitz carried directing the captain to the position the integrity demanded. The warning saved lives. The Marines who received Tarvitz's warning reached shelter before the virus bombs fell. The surviving loyalists, Emperor's children, Death Guard, World Eaters, formed the defensive force that Tarvitz organized and led. The force held for months against the traitors' ground assault. Tarvitz died on Istvan III. The captain's death was the death of the Emperor's children's honor, the last bearer of the Legion's original values eliminated by the Legion the values corruption had produced. Solomon Demeter was another loyalist captain whose character reflected the Emperor's children's pre-corruption values. Demeter was a warrior whose commitment to the martial excellence the Legion's culture prescribed was genuine, and whose commitment was maintained through the corruption's early stages. Demeter fought. Demeter served. Demeter maintained the values even as the values corruption was producing the changes the values maintenance could not prevent. Demeter's fate was the loyalists' fate. The Marine whose personal integrity survived the institutional corruption was consumed by the institutional corruption's military expression. The loyalists did not fall to chaos. The loyalists fell to the traitors, whose chaos corruption gave them the power and the numbers the loyalists could not match. The loyalists' deaths are the story's most important element, because the deaths demonstrate the counterfactual the corruption's absence would have produced. The Emperor's children who remained loyal, who maintained the values the Emperor's name demanded, who fought for the Emperor against the Legion the Emperor had named, were the beings the entire Legion was supposed to be. The loyalists' quality, the capability, the integrity, the commitment was the Legion's quality before the corruption redirected the quality toward the corruption's purposes. The loyalists died. The traitors survived. The survival was the corruption's victory and the value's defeat. And the defeat is the story's central grief. The grief is compounded by the loyalists' awareness. The Marines who fought on Istvan III, who defended the Emperor's honor against the Legion that bore the Emperor's name, understood what they were fighting. They were fighting their brothers. They were fighting the beings they had trained alongside, fought alongside, celebrated alongside. The enemies were the friends. The traitors were the brothers. The killing was fratricide in the most literal sense, and the fratricide's horror was experienced by the loyalists with the full emotional weight the Emperor's children's heightened sensitivity produced. The loyalists felt everything. The Emperor's children's enhanced emotional range, the sensitivity the culture had produced, the capacity for experience the pursuit of excellence required, made the loyalists' experience of the betrayal more intense than a less sensitive being's experience would have been. The loyalists felt the betrayal with the full force of the emotional capability their creation had provided, and the full force was devastating. The loyalists fought anyway. The Marines whose emotional devastation exceeded what most beings could sustain fought through the devastation with the discipline the Emperor's name demanded. The discipline was the last expression of the values the corruption had not reached, the final demonstration that the Emperor's children's original purpose, the pursuit of excellence in the Emperor's service, could sustain the pursuit's practitioners even when the pursuit's institution had abandoned the pursuit's original direction. The discipline held. The loyalists held. The holding was the Emperor's children's last gift to the Imperium, the proof that the values the corruption consumed were real, that the excellence the corruption redirected was genuine, that the legion the Emperor had named was worthy of the naming before the corruption made the naming the mockery it would become. A handful of loyalist Emperor's children survived beyond Istvan III. Some joined the Black Shields, the renegade formations of loyalist marines from traitor legions who continued to fight for the Emperor after their legion's betrayal. The Death Eagles chapter is rumored to have descended from loyalist Emperor's children, though the rumor is not confirmed, and the Death Eagles' own records do not address the question. The loyalists who survived carried the burden of the name. The Marines who bore the Emperor's children's gene seed, who carried the biological inheritance of the legion that had betrayed the Emperor, fought for the Emperor while carrying the genetic legacy of the Emperor's betrayers. The burden was the shame the loyalists did not earn, the shame of belonging to a legion whose betrayal the loyalists had not participated in, but whose gene seed the loyalists could not remove. The shame is the loyalists' tragedy within the tragedy. The Marines whose loyalty exceeded their legions were punished for their legion's disloyalty through the suspicion and the hostility the legion's betrayal produced in the beings who could not distinguish between the loyalist and the traitor. The loyalists deserved better. The loyalists did not receive better. The galaxy does not distribute its rewards according to the recipient's merit. The loyalist's story is the Emperor's children's story told in reverse. The Third Legion's narrative is the progression from virtue to vice, the noble pursuit corrupted, the excellent transformed into the excessive, the name's honor converted into the name's shame. The loyalist narrative is the persistence of virtue within the vice, the noble pursuit maintained despite the corruption, the excellence sustained despite the institution's abandonment of the standard, the name's honor carried by the beings the institution no longer represented. The loyalist's narrative is smaller. The loyalist's narrative is also truer. The truth of the Emperor's children is not the corruption. The truth of the Emperor's children is the loyalty that survived the corruption, that fought the corruption, that died resisting the corruption. The truth died on Istvan III. The corruption survived. The galaxy remembers the corruption. The galaxy should remember the loyalty. The Emperor's children's conduct during the Siege of Terror is the moment the Third Legion's corruption became visible to the galaxy, and the visibility's content is the worst thing the heresy produced. While the other traitor legions fought for the strategic objectives the War Master's plan required, the taking of the spaceport, the breaching of the outer walls, the assault on the Eternity Gate, the military objectives whose achievement the rebellion's success depended on, the Emperor's children descended on Terra's civilian population with a hunger that the military vocabulary cannot describe, because the hunger was not military. The Third Legion ignored Horus. The War Master whose rebellion the Emperor's children had joined, whose cause the Emperor's children had declared for, whose strategic objectives the Emperor's children's military capability was supposed to serve, issued orders. The orders directed the Emperor's children to the walls. The orders assigned the Third Legion its place in the siege's military prosecution. The orders were ignored. Fulgrim had no interest in the walls. The Daemon Prince whose ascension had transformed the Primarch's values from the martial to the experiential did not care about the War Master's strategic objectives. The walls were the War Master's concern. The civilians were Fulgrim's interest. The Emperor's children fell on the hive cities. Terra's population, the billions of human beings who inhabited the throne world's massive urban structures, The citizens whose existence the Emperor's governance had protected since the Unification Wars was subjected to the assault the Emperor's children's corruption had been building toward since the cleansing of Laren. The assault was not warfare. The assault was feeding. The Emperor's children attacked the civilian population for the sensory experience the attacking produced. The suffering, the terror, the despair that billions of victims generated. The sonic weapons screamed through the hab blocks. The Marines whose nervous systems had been rewired to process pain as pleasure moved through the population centers with the leisurely thoroughness of beings who were not fighting a war but enjoying a meal. The Marines took their time. The War Master's siege was measured in days. The Emperor's children's assault on the civilians was measured in experiences, each encounter with the population producing the sensory input the Emperor's children's corrupted nervous systems demanded. The Marines did not move quickly. The Marines moved thoroughly, ensuring each moment of the assault produced the maximum intensity the moment's conditions permitted. The civilians had no defense. The Imperial Fist's garrison was at the walls. The Astra Militarum's regiments were at the gates. The military capability that might have protected Terra's civilian population from the Emperor's children's assault was deployed against the other traitor legion's military assault. The defense's allocation reflecting the assumption that the traitor legion's objectives were military rather than experiential. The assumption was correct for every traitor legion except the third. The Death Guard fought for the walls. The World Eaters fought for the gates. The Iron Warriors fought for the breaches. The Sons of Horus fought for the War Master's plan. The Emperor's children fought for the sensation, and the sensation was found in the civilian population rather than in the fortifications. The devastation was immeasurable. Not in the military sense. The Emperor's children's diversion from the siege's military objectives reduced the traitor force's combat power by the Third Legion's contribution. The reduction arguably affecting the siege's outcome. In the humanitarian sense, the billions of civilians who were subjected to the Emperor's children's attentions produced a suffering whose scope the Imperium's historical records describe, with the restraint that horror imposes on the describing. The records do not fully describe what the Emperor's children did. The specifics are classified or destroyed, the details too disturbing for the historical record to preserve without the preservation serving as the vector for the corruption the details describe. The records acknowledge the event's occurrence. The records do not enumerate the event's content. The omission is the horror's measure. The Imperium's historical records, which describe the heresy's other atrocities in unflinching detail, the virus bombing of Istvan III, the massacre at the drop site, the World Eaters' rampages, the Night Lord's terror campaigns, cannot describe the Emperor's children's conduct during the Siege of Terror. The events exceed the record's capacity to contain. The War Master noticed the Emperor's children's absence. Horus, whose strategic plan for the siege required every traitor legion's contribution, recognized that the Emperor's children's military capability was not being applied to the siege's military objectives. The War Master's reaction is recorded: fury. The War Master, who had recruited Fulgrim to the rebellion, who had relied on the Third Legion's precision and combat capability for the siege's prosecution, discovered that the legion he had recruited was not fighting the siege. The legion was feeding. The fury did not produce the correction. The Emperor's children did not return to the walls. The Third Legion continued its assault on the civilian population, the War Master's orders as irrelevant to the Emperor's children's corrupted priorities as the Emperor's orders had become. The Emperor's children served no master during the Siege of Terror. Not the Emperor, whose name the Legion bore. Not the War Master, whose rebellion the Legion had joined. Not even Slaanesh, whose worship the corruption served. The Dark Prince did not need to direct the Emperor's children's conduct, because the corruption had produced beings whose conduct served the Prince's purposes without the Prince's direction. The Emperor's children served sensation. The sensation was the Master. The Master's demands were met through the medium of the civilian population's suffering, and the suffering's continuation was the only objective the Emperor's children pursued during the most consequential military engagement in the Imperium's history. The War Master fell. The Emperor destroyed Horus. The siege ended. The traitor legions fled. The Emperor's children fled alongside them, carrying the memories of what the feeding had produced, and the hunger for the feeding's continuation. The retreat was not the military withdrawal the other legions conducted. The retreat was the addict's departure from the supply, the forced separation from the source of the stimulus the addiction demanded. The withdrawal producing the craving the Eye of Terror's conditions would address, but that the material universe's conventional reality could not. The Emperor's children left Terror having accomplished nothing the War Master's rebellion had required, and everything the corruption's hunger had demanded. The walls were untouched by the Third Legion's weapons. The civilians were not. The Siege of Terror was the Emperor's children's final contribution to the heresy, and the contribution was not what the War Master expected. The traitor legions assaulted Terror. The War Master's forces attacked the Imperial Palace, the Death Guard, the World Eaters, the Iron Warriors, the Sons of Horus, the legions whose commitment to the rebellion's military objectives exceeded their individual pursuits, fought the loyalists at the palace's walls. The Emperor's children did not assault the palace. The Third Legion, the Emperor's children, the warriors who bore the Emperor's name, ignored the War Master's orders and descended on Terror's civilian population instead. Fulgrim's legion abandoned the siege's military objectives and conducted a campaign of atrocity against the billions of human beings who inhabited Terror's hive cities. The campaign was not military, it was experiential. The Emperor's children attacked Terror's civilians for the sensations the attacking produced. The suffering, the terror, the despair that the billions of victims generated, and that the Emperor's children consumed with the appetite the Slaaneshi corruption had developed. The Third Legion turned its weapons on the people whose name the Legion bore, the Emperor's children, the human beings whose protection was the Emperor's purpose. The turning was the corruption's most complete expression. The guardians had become the predators. The protectors had become the devourers. The Emperor's name, which should have been the shield, had become the weapon. While the other traitor legions fought for the War Master's strategic objectives, the taking of the palace, the killing of the Emperor, the military victory the rebellion's success required, the Emperor's children wandered Terror's population centers in a haze of sensation-seeking violence that served no strategic purpose and that advanced no military objective. The wandering cost Horus the siege. The argument has been made by the Imperium's military historians that the Emperor's children's contribution, the combat capability of an entire legion, deployed against the palace's defenses rather than against the palace's civilians, might have produced the breakthrough the War Master needed. The argument is speculative. The argument's implications are devastating, because the implications suggest that the War Master's defeat was produced not by the Loyalists' defense, but by the traitor's self-indulgence. Horus fell. The Emperor destroyed the War Master. The heresy ended. The traitor legions fled. The Emperor's children left a trail of depopulated worlds in their wake as they retreated to the Eye of Terror. The Third Legion did not retreat with the strategic purpose the other legions maintained. The Emperor's children retreated because the Eye of Terror offered experiences the material universe did not. Within the Eye of Terror, the Emperor's children became the first traitor legion to begin raiding imperial worlds for captives and plunder. Their excesses knew no limits. The raiding alone could not fuel their ever-expanding depravities. In their unrestrained fervor, they began capturing the slaves and servants of the other traitor legions, triggering a series of wars within the Eye of Terror itself. The Legion Wars, the conflicts between the traitor legions within the Eye of Terror, were partly caused by the Emperor's children's insatiable appetite. The other traitor legions, whose slaves and resources the Emperor's children raided alongside the Imperium's, responded with the violence the raiding demanded. The Emperor's children fought the other traitor legions with the same sensation, seeking fervor they brought to the raiding of imperial worlds. Fulgrim disappeared. The Daemon Prince retreated to a planet of pleasure gifted to him by Slaanesh, a daemon world within the Eye of Terror, whose conditions the Daemon Prince shapes to the prince's desires. Within the daemon world, Fulgrim replays his battles, seeking in each repetition the perfect execution the original engagement did not achieve. The pursuit of perfection continues in daemonhood. The perfection does not arrive. The repetition is the punishment and the pleasure simultaneously. Fabius Bile assumed command of the remaining Emperor's children and regrouped at Canticle City, the fortress of the Emperor's children on the daemon world of Harmony. From Canticle City, Bile launched the destruction of the sons of Horus's fortress at Malium. The body of Horus was taken and cloned by the Emperor's children Bile's experiment. The apothecary's attempt to recreate the War Master through the biological methods the apothecary's skills provided. The Horus clone was destroyed by Abaddon. The Despoiler, the being who would become the War Master's successor, destroyed the clone and the fortress that housed it, the destruction serving as the declaration that the sons of Horus were dead and the Black Legion had begun. Bile departed the Emperor's children. The apothecary whose experiments had produced the biological modifications the corruption required left the Legion and became independent. Bile's subsequent career, the experiments across the galaxy, the New Men program, the creation of a Fulgrim clone, is a narrative that extends far beyond the Third Legion's story. The Fulgrim clone exists. Bile created an uncorrupted copy of the Primarch using preserved original gene seed. The clone was captured by Trazyn the Infinite, the Necron Overlord, whose collection includes beings of extraordinary significance preserved in stasis. The uncorrupted Fulgrim is in Trazyn's collection on Solemnus, the Primarch as he was before the corruption. The potential that the corruption consumed maintained in a Necron's curiosity cabinet. The Emperor's children splintered into warbands. The Slaaneshi worship's individualism dissolved the Legion's institutional cohesion. Each Marine's pursuit of sensation surpassed the Marine's commitment to the collective. The Emperor's Children's post-heresy existence is not the existence of a legion. It is the existence of hundreds of warbands whose members pursue the sensations Slaanesh prescribed. Noise Marines are the Emperor's Children's most recognizable legacy. The sonic weaponry that Bile's experiments with liar biology produced, the nerve-paralyzing shrieks, the sonic blasters, the doom sirens whose acoustic output produces physical damage, became the Emperor's Children's signature armament. The Noise Marine is the corruption's most literal expression. The Legion whose culture valued music has transformed the music into weaponry. The beauty has become the weapon. The art has become the instrument of destruction. The sonic blaster is the Emperor's Children's musical tradition, expressed through the channel the corruption provided. The Noise Marine fights with sound, not the disciplined, measured sound of the compositions the Legion's pre-corruption musicians produced. The overwhelming, cacophonous, physically destructive sound that the Slaaneshi worship's emphasis on sensation has produced. The sound kills. The sound maims. The sound produces the suffering the Noise Marine's corrupted nervous system experiences as pleasure. The Noise Marine is the Emperor's child who has replaced every other sense with the auditory. The Marine whose experience of reality has been narrowed to the single dimension the sonic weaponry exploits. The dimension of sound, refined past the aesthetic into the destructive. The beautiful made lethal through the amplification the corruption provides. Lucius the Eternal is the Emperor's Children's most cursed warrior. The captain whose obsession with swordsmanship the corruption amplified has been granted a dark immortality by Slaanesh. Lucius cannot permanently die. Any being who kills Lucius and takes even a moment's satisfaction from the killing, a flicker of pride, a heartbeat of triumph, is consumed by the curse. The killer's body is transformed over days of agonizing metamorphosis into Lucius's form. The killer's consciousness is absorbed, added to the chorus of screaming faces that adorn Lucius's armor. The faces are the kill's trophies. Every face on Lucius's armor is a being who killed Lucius, and who was consumed by the curse the killing activated. The faces scream. The screaming is permanent, the absorbed consciousness experiencing eternal agony within the armor's surface. The killer's triumph transformed into the killer's punishment. The curse has produced Lucius's resurrections across 10,000 years. The warrior champion dies and returns. The cycle repeats. The faces accumulate. The armor's surface is covered with the screaming faces of beings whose only crime was the satisfaction they took from killing a monster. The curse is Slaanesh's most personalized gift. The Dark Prince has invested specific attention in the champion whose devotion exceeds the standard. Lucius fights. Lucius dies. Lucius returns. The eternal champion of the god of excess, sustained by the curse that makes the champion's death the champion's rebirth. The Emperor's children in the 41st millennium are scattered across the galaxy. The warbands that the post-heresy splintering produced continue to operate, raiding, indulging, pursuing the sensations the Slaaneshi worship prescribes. The warbands do not coordinate. The warbands do not pursue collective objectives. The warbands pursue individual experiences. The Noise Marines' sonic weaponry echoes across the battlefields where the Emperor's children fight. The weaponized music, the lethal harmonics, the sonic assault that the lair-derived modifications produce The sound is the Emperor's children's auditory signature. A world that hears the noise Marine's weapons knows what has arrived. The Emperor's children's relationship with the other Chaos Legions is defined by mutual contempt. The Death Guard's stoicism recoils from the Emperor's children's flamboyance. The Iron Warrior's pragmatism dismisses the Emperor's children's aestheticism. The World Eater's fury is contemptuous of the Emperor's children's subtlety. The Emperor's children do not care. The Emperor's children do not care about anything except the sensation. In the era Indomitus, the age after the Great Rift's formation, the Emperor's children's activities have intensified. The Rift's disruption of the barrier between real space and the warp has produced conditions that favor the Slaanesh worship's sensory pursuits. The warp's closer proximity to reality has amplified the stimuli available to beings whose nervous systems have been modified to extract maximum sensation from every experience. The warbands are active. The raiding has increased. The noise Marine's weapons are heard on more worlds than in any previous period. The Emperor's children are feeding on a galaxy whose conditions have never been more favorable for the feeding the Emperor's children require. Fulgrim stirs. The Daemon Prince, whose retreat to the pleasure world had removed the Primarch from active engagement with the material universe, has shown signs of activity that the Imperium's intelligence apparatus monitors with concern. The serpentine Daemon Prince, the four-armed monster that the pursuit of perfection produced, may be emerging from the millennia of self-imposed isolation. The emergence, if it occurs, would represent the most significant threat the Emperor's children have posed since the heresy. A Daemon Prince Primarch, a being whose power combines the Primarch's superhuman capability with the Daemon's warp-sustained enhancement, leading the Emperor's children's scattered warbands in a coordinated campaign, would produce a military threat the Imperium's current forces would struggle to counter. The emergence has not occurred. The signs are monitored. The concern is maintained. The Emperor's children wait, or the Emperor's children do not wait. Because the Emperor's children do not wait for anything, the Emperor's children pursue, and the pursuing is the purpose, and the purpose does not accommodate the patience the waiting would require. The Third Legion pursues. The pursuing is the existence. The existence does not pause. Lucius the Eternal is the Emperor's children's most tragic individual warrior. And the tragedy is not Lucius's. It is the galaxy's. The curse that Slaanesh has placed on Lucius is the Dark Prince's most cruelly elegant gift. A mechanism of immortality that punishes the beings who attempt to end the immortality rather than the being the immortality sustains. Every warrior who kills Lucius and who derives even the smallest measure of satisfaction from the killing is consumed. The killer's body transformed over agonizing days into Lucius's body. The killer's consciousness absorbed into the screaming chorus of faces that adorn the armor Lucius wears. The transformation is not possession. The killer does not become Lucius in the consciousness overwriting sense that demonic possession produces. The killer becomes the medium through which Lucius reconstitutes, the killer's physical matter reshaping itself into Lucius's form. The killer's identity dissolving into the screaming face that joins the dozens already embedded in the armor's surface. The killer is not replaced. The killer is consumed. The consumption is permanent. The face that appears on Lucius's armor is the killer's consciousness preserved in a state of eternal agony. The awareness that killed the monster maintained in the armor's surface, experiencing the horror of the killing's consequence for as long as the armor exists. The faces scream. The screaming is not metaphorical. The screaming is the consciousness's response to the condition the killing has produced. The eternal awareness, the eternal agony, the eternal reminder that the killing's satisfaction was the killing's cost. Lucius's pre-corruption career was the career of a swordsman whose skill exceeded every other emperor's child's. The captain whose blade work produced victories the Legion's culture celebrated was the marine whose pursuit of martial perfection most closely mirrored the Legion's broader pursuit of comprehensive excellence. Lucius was the best. The best at the specific discipline Lucius had chosen, the discipline's mastery achieved through the decades of practice the mastery required. The corruption directed the mastery toward the obsessive. Lucius's skill, the genuine earned practice-produced excellence the swordsman carried, was amplified by the Slaaneshi influence into the fixation the skill's owner could not control. Lucius began fighting for the fighting rather than for the purpose the fighting served. The combat ceased to be the means. The combat became the end, the sensation of the fighting. The specific, intense, physically overwhelming experience that combat produced in the Marine whose nervous system had been modified to extract maximum stimulus from every physical engagement, replaced the objective the fighting was supposed to achieve. Lucius scarred himself after every duel. The scars, the marks the captain carved into his own face, with the blade the captain carried, recorded the duel's sensations in the flesh the sensations had touched. The scarring was the corruption's most visible expression on the individual level, the Marine's body inscribed with the evidence of the corruption's progression. Each scar a record of a duel the Marine had fought for the duel's sensation rather than the duel's purpose. The curse was Slaanesh's response to Lucius's death at the hands of a loyalist during the heresy's aftermath. The swordsman who had pursued the perfect duel was killed, defeated by a warrior whose skill exceeded Lucius's, or whose fortune exceeded Lucius's, the specifics varying across the accounts. The killer took satisfaction from the killing, because the killing of a monster produces the satisfaction the killing deserves. The satisfaction was the trigger. Slaanesh activated the curse. The killer's body began the transformation. Days of agony. The killer's form reshaping itself, the muscles rearranging, the bones restructuring, the features reorganizing into Lucius's scarred, recognizable face. The killer's consciousness dissolved. The killer's face appeared on the armor's surface. Lucius rose. The swordsman's body, reconstituted through the killer's matter, returned to the awareness the curse sustained. Lucius was alive. The killer was not. The curse was proven. The curse has been proven repeatedly across 10 millennia. Lucius has been killed dozens of times by space marines, by Xenos champions, by Imperial commanders whose capability exceeded the swordsman's in the moment the killing required. Each killer has taken satisfaction. Each killer has been consumed. Each killer's face has joined the armor's chorus. The curse produces a paradox the galaxy cannot resolve. The monster must be fought because the monster's activities demand the fighting. The monster cannot be killed because the killing produces the satisfaction the curse requires. The satisfaction is inevitable. The being who kills a monster takes satisfaction from the killing because the killing's moral rightness produces the satisfaction the moral rightness deserves. The curse weaponizes morality. The being who kills Lucius and who takes satisfaction from the killing of a monster, from the protection of the innocent the killing provides, from the justice the killing delivers, is punished for the satisfaction. The morality that motivates the killing is the vulnerability the curse exploits. The just are consumed, the righteous are absorbed. The satisfaction that the killing deserves is the satisfaction the killing punishes. One story describes Lucius being killed by a landmine, a weapon that could not experience satisfaction. The curse activated regardless, consuming the worker who had built the landmine, who had taken professional pride in the device's construction. The pride was the satisfaction. The satisfaction was enough. The accounts are not confirmed. The accounts produce the horror the accounts are designed to produce. The awareness that the curse's trigger is not limited to the combat's satisfaction, but extends to any satisfaction the killing's chain of causation produces. The galaxy cannot kill Lucius without the killing producing the consequence the killing is designed to prevent. The monster's death produces the monster's resurrection. The justice produces the injustice. The killing produces the consumed. Lucius wanders the galaxy. The eternal, the title the curse has earned, fights the duels the obsession demands, challenges the champions the galaxy produces, seeks the combats the sensation seeking requires. Lucius is looking for the perfect duel, the duel whose sensation exceeds every previous duel's, the duel the swordsman has been pursuing since the cleansing of Laren. Since the Leia Blade's corruption redirected the pursuit of skill toward the pursuit of sensation. The perfect duel has not occurred. The seeking continues. The duels are fought. The champions are defeated, or the champions defeat Lucius. The defeated champions die. The victorious champions die, consumed by the curse. Their satisfaction producing the transformation their satisfaction triggers. Lucius endures. The curse endures. The faces scream. The screaming is the curse's sound. The sound is Lucius's companion, the permanent, ongoing, never-ceasing chorus of the consumed. The voices of the beings whose only crime was the satisfaction they took from killing a monster. The sound is the Emperor's Children's most appropriate soundtrack. The music of the consumed. The composition of the cursed, the performance that does not end. The audience is trapped in the armor. The performance continues. Chemos was destroyed after the heresy, and the destruction was the final severance of the Emperor's children from the being they had been, the world that had produced Fulgrim, the dying industrial planet whose scarcity had shaped the Primarch's obsession with improvement, whose population had elevated the Primarch through gratitude rather than conquest, was subjected to the Imperium's vengeance in the heresy's aftermath. The Scouring, the campaign that drove the traitor legions from the Imperium's territory, reached Chemos and found a world whose population had been complicit in the Third Legion's rebellion. The complicity's nature is debated by the Imperium's historians. Whether Chemos's population actively supported the Emperor's Children's betrayal, or whether the population was merely the Legion's homeworld, guilty by association rather than by action, is a question the Scouring's commanders did not pause to investigate. The planet was destroyed. The method, virus bombing, orbital bombardment, the specific technique the Imperium employed varies across the accounts. The outcome is consistent. Chemos ceased to exist as a habitable world. The destruction removed the Emperor's Children's origin, the planet that had shaped the Primarch's character, the scarcity that produced the pursuit of improvement. the industrial culture that valued the efficient and the excellent. The population whose elevation of Fulgrim had been the Primarch's first experience of the relationship between capability and governance was gone. The Emperor's children who fled to the Eye of Terror after the heresy carried no home world. The Third Legion had no origin to return to, no population to recruit from, no physical anchor to the being the Legion had been before the corruption transformed the being into the monster. The loss mattered, not strategically. The Emperor's children's recruitment from Chemos had been supplemented by recruitment from Terra and from the worlds the Great Crusade's campaigns had conquered, and the Chemos-specific recruitment was not essential to the Legion's numbers. Symbolically, Chemos was the proof that the Emperor's children had been something before the corruption, that the pursuit of improvement had been genuine, that the values had been real, that the Legion the Emperor had named had deserved the naming. The proof was destroyed. The planet that demonstrated the Emperor's children's origin was eliminated, and the elimination removed the physical evidence that the Third Legion's pre-corruption quality had existed. The Eye of Terror received the Emperor's children, and the Eye's conditions accelerated the fragmentation the corruption's individualism was already producing. The Legion Wars, the conflicts between the traitor legions within the Eye of Terror, consumed the Emperor's children's remaining institutional cohesion. The Third Legion, whose discipline had been dissolved by the corruption's emphasis on individual sensation, could not maintain the collective identity the institutional survival required. The Emperor's children's warbands fought each other alongside the other traitor legions. The competition for resources, for slaves, for the experiences the Eye of Terror's warp-saturated environment provided, producing the conflicts the competition demanded. The fighting was not the strategic warfare the heresy had produced. The fighting was the sensation-seeking violence the corruption demanded. Warbands engaging each other for the experience the engagement produced, rather than for the strategic objectives the engagement might have served. The Emperor's children fought the Death Guard for the pleasure of fighting the Death Guard. The Emperor's children fought the World Eaters for the sensation of fighting the World Eaters. The fighting was the purpose. The purpose was the feeding. Fulgrim's withdrawal from the Legion accelerated the fragmentation. The Daemon Prince, whose retreat to the pleasure world removed the Primarch's authority from the Legion's governance, left the Emperor's children without the leadership the institutional survival demanded. Fabius Bile's assumption of command was temporary. The apothecary, whose scientific interests exceeded the military's requirements, did not maintain the command the assumption had produced. Bile departed. The command structure collapsed. The collapse produced the warbands. The Emperor's children's post-heresy existence is the existence of fragments, individual warbands whose size ranges from a handful of Marines to several hundred, whose leadership ranges from the competent to the deranged, whose activities range from the strategic to the incomprehensible. Some warbands maintain a semblance of the Legion's original culture. The Marines, whose corruption has not entirely consumed the values the culture produced, still pursue the excellent, the martial precision, the artistic expression, the comprehensive commitment to the quality the Emperor's name once demanded. The pursuit is corrupted. The excellence has been transformed into the excessive by the corruption's amplification, but the pursuit's structure is recognizable. The pre-corruption Emperor's child is visible beneath the post-corruption monster. Other warbands have abandoned every trace of the original culture. The Marines, whose corruption has consumed everything the pre-corruption values contained, are pure sensation seekers. Beings whose existence is devoted entirely to the pursuit of the stimulus the corrupted nervous system demands, without the structural element the culture once provided. These warbands are not military forces. They are feeding organisms. Collections of beings whose collective activity serves no purpose except the collective feeding. The most dangerous warbands are the ones that maintain the original culture's structure alongside the corruption's content. The warband whose leader retains the pre-corruption military capability, the tactical precision, the strategic awareness, the comprehensive excellence the Emperor's children's training produced, while employing the capability in service of the corruption's objectives, is the warband the Imperium's forces fear most. The pre-corruption quality makes the warband effective. The post-corruption purpose makes the warband terrible. The combination, effectiveness and terror, is the Emperor's children's contribution to the Long War's prosecution when the warbands choose to participate in the Long War's objectives. The warbands that fight alongside the other Chaos forces in the Black Crusades and the incursions the Long War produces bring the combination to the engagement, the military quality that the other Chaos forces' less disciplined warriors cannot match, deployed in service of the horrifying purposes the Slaanesh worship prescribes. The combination is rare. Most Emperor's children warbands do not participate in the Long War's strategic objectives, because the Long War's objectives do not serve the sensation seeking the warband's existence prioritizes. The warbands raid when the raiding produces the sensations the warbands desire. The warbands fight when the fighting produces the experience the warbands demand. The warbands ignore the Long War's broader purpose, because the broader purpose does not provide the immediate stimulus the warband's corrupted nervous systems require. Abaddon despises the Emperor's children. The despoiler whose Long War requires the traitor legion's collective effort regards the Third Legion's self-indulgence as the evidence that the Emperor's children have abandoned the war's purpose. The contempt is mutual. The Emperor's children regard the despoiler's strategic ambitions as the evidence that the despoiler has not understood what the corruption's gifts have made available. The mutual contempt produces the cooperation's absence. The Emperor's children do not reliably participate in Abaddon's campaigns, and Abaddon does not reliably include the Emperor's children in the campaign's planning. The absence is the corruption's strategic consequence. The Third Legion, whose military capability would significantly enhance the Long War's prosecution, is unavailable for the prosecution, because the corruption's priorities have superseded the war's. The Long War proceeds without the Emperor's children's reliable participation. The Emperor's children proceed without the Long War's strategic direction. The two activities, the war and the indulgence, continue in parallel, occasionally intersecting when the intersection serves both activities' requirements, more often diverging when the divergence serves the indulgence the Emperor's children priorities. The divergence is the corruption's final expression. The legion that bore the Emperor's name has diverged from the purpose the name represented, the service of the Emperor, the prosecution of the Emperor's wars, the commitment to the excellence the Emperor's name demanded. The divergence is total. The name remains. The purpose is gone. The Emperor's children carry the Emperor's name through the galaxy. The name is the mockery. The name is the trophy. The name is the wound the corruption inflicted on the Emperor's legacy, and that the corruption's continuation keeps open. The name bleeds. The bleeding is the punishment. The punishment is eternal. Fabius Bile is the Emperor's children's most enduring legacy to the galaxy, and the legacy is a horror the Legion's pre-corruption culture would have found unconscionable. The chief apothecary who began the genetic experiments that produced the Legion's biological corruption has spent the 10 millennia since the heresy conducting experiments whose scope exceeds what the Legion's corruption demanded. Bile is no longer an Emperor's child. The apothecary departed the Third Legion long ago, operating independently across the galaxy as the self-styled primogenitor, the creator of new life, the engineer of biological possibility, the being whose scientific capability exceeds the Imperium's mechanicus, and whose ethical constraints were abandoned alongside the Legion, the constraints' absence predated. Bile's New Men program is the apothecary's most significant ongoing project. The attempt to create a new strain of humanity whose biological capabilities exceed the baseline, and whose creation does not require the Emperor's genecraft or the Mechanicus's technological rituals. The New Men are Bile's answer to the question the apothecary has been asking since the heresy: can the human species be improved beyond the Emperor's design? The question is heresy. The question is also the Emperor's children's original question, expressed through the biological medium rather than the cultural. The Third Legion pursued the improvement of everything: the martial, the artistic, the intellectual, the social. Bile pursues the improvement of the fundamental, the biological baseline that everything else is built on. The pursuit is the same. The medium is different. The corruption is the same. Bile's most significant individual creation is the Fulgrim clone. Using preserved samples of the Primarch's original gene seed, the genetic material the Emperor had designed for the Third Legion's creation, uncorrupted by the Lair Blade's influence, Bile grew a copy of Fulgrim, not the Daemon Prince, not the corrupted monster the Lair Blade's daemon had produced. The Primarch, the being Fulgrim, was before the daemon's whispers began. The Palatine Phoenix as the Emperor had designed him. The clone was perfect. The term is used with its full weight. The Fulgrim clone possessed the Primarch's original capabilities, the original personality, the original values without the corruption the original had undergone. The clone was the Emperor's children's Primarch as the Primarch was meant to be. The being whose pursuit of excellence was genuine, and whose commitment to the Emperor's name was sincere. The clone's existence raises questions the Emperor's children's story demands but cannot answer. Is the clone Fulgrim? Does the being who possesses the Primarch's genetics and the Primarch's pre-corruption personality constitute the same being the Primarch was? Is the uncorrupted copy the Primarch, and the corrupted daemon Prince the aberration? Or is the daemon Prince the Primarch, the being the Primarch became through the choices the Primarch made, and the clone a copy of a person who no longer exists? The questions are not answered because the clone is not available for the answering. Trazyn the Infinite, the Necron Overlord whose collection of the galaxy's significant artifacts is the Necron's most eccentric individual project, captured the Fulgrim clone and added the clone to the collection Trazyn maintains on Solemnes. The uncorrupted Fulgrim is in stasis, preserved alongside the other items Trazyn has collected. The being that the Third Legion's Primarch was before the fall maintained in the condition the fall prevented. The clone's preservation is the story's most poignant element. The being the Emperor created, the Primarch whose pursuit of excellence was the noblest ambition the Emperor bestowed on any of his sons, exists in a Necron's collection. The uncorrupted Fulgrim is a museum piece. The potential that the corruption consumed is preserved in stasis, accessible to no one, available to no purpose, maintained by a Xenos whose interest in the clone is the collector's interest in the curiosity rather than the father's interest in the child. The Emperor's greatest creation of the Third, the Primarch the Emperor designed to embody the pursuit of perfection, is a specimen in a display case on a dead world. The irony would make Slaanesh laugh. Bile himself has expressed indifference to the clone's fate. The apothecary whose scientific capability produced the clone, whose understanding of the Emperor's genecraft permitted the replication the clone required, moved on from the creation with the detachment the apothecary brings to all completed experiments. The clone was the product. The product's disposition is the product's own concern. Bile's relationship with the Emperor's children is the relationship of a being who has outgrown the institution that produced him. The apothecary whose experiments began the Legion's biological corruption no longer serves the Legion's purposes. Bile serves Bile's purposes. The scientific inquiry, the biological experimentation, the pursuit of the improvement that the Emperor's children's culture originally prescribed, and that Bile has maintained through the corruption the culture underwent. Bile is the Emperor's children's original values, expressed through a being who has abandoned the values context. The pursuit of improvement, stripped of the cultural refinement, the artistic sensitivity, the comprehensive excellence the Third Legion's culture once maintained, is the bare mechanism operating without the aesthetic that once surrounded it. Bile pursues improvement. The pursuit is genuine. The pursuit is also monstrous, because the pursuit's methods include the experimentation on living subjects whose consent is not sought, and whose suffering is the experiment's cost. The monstrousness is the Emperor's children's values expressed through the corruption's medium. The pursuit that was noble has become the pursuit that is horrifying. And the transition is the same transition the entire Legion underwent. The noble become the grotesque through the amplification that removes the boundary between the two. Bile is the Emperor's children in concentrated form, the single being who embodies the Legion's trajectory from the pursuit of improvement to the prosecution of horror without the cultural trappings the Legion's broader membership maintained. Bile is the essence. The essence is the corruption made pure. The apothecary continues. The experiments continue. The New Men program continues. The pursuit continues. The pursuit does not end because the pursuit is Bile's nature, and the nature does not change, and the not changing is the Emperor's children's most persistent quality. The quality that sustained the pre-corruption excellence and that sustains the post-corruption horror with equal effectiveness. The Emperor's children do not change. The Emperor's children amplify. The amplification continues. The Noise Marines are the Emperor's children's most enduring creation, and the creation's origin is the corruption's most precise expression. The first Noise Marine was an accident. The modifications that Fabius Bile conducted on the Emperor's children's warriors during the Great Crusade, the lair-derived biological enhancements, the nervous system rewiring, the sensory amplification that the pursuit of perfection's biological expression demanded, produced, in some Marines, a capability the modifications had not intended. The modified Marines could produce sound, not the ordinary sound that the vocal cords generate, sound whose acoustic properties exceeded the natural voice's output, concentrated, directed, physically destructive sound that the modified tracheal systems produced through the interaction of the layer-derived organs with the Marines' existing respiratory apparatus. Eidolon was the first. The Lord Commander, whose tracheal implant Bile had installed, was the first Emperor's child to use the modified voice as a weapon, the nerve-paralyzing shriek that the layer-derived organ produced. Directed at the enemy during the engagement on Istvan Extremis. The shriek worked. The enemy was incapacitated. The sound was the weapon, and the weapon was the voice. And the voice was the layer biology's contribution to the Emperor's children's arsenal. The capability was developed. The accidental discovery became the deliberate program. Bile's refinement of the layer-derived modifications producing the specialized organs and the external weapon systems that the Noise Marines' combat doctrine would eventually require. The internal modifications, the tracheal enhancements, the auditory system alterations, the nervous system rewiring that allowed the Marine to perceive and produce sound at frequencies and intensities the unmodified human biology could not access, were supplemented by the external weaponry the Noise Marines became known for. The sonic blaster is the Noise Marines' primary weapon, an external instrument that the Marines' modified auditory and neurological systems interface with, producing the concentrated sonic beam whose acoustic pressure produces physical damage in the target the beam engages. The sonic blaster does not fire projectiles. The sonic blaster fires sound, a focused wave of acoustic energy whose frequency and intensity exceed what the target's physical structure can withstand. The damage the sonic blaster produces is unique in the Imperium's arsenal. The target struck by a sonic blaster's beam does not experience the kinetic impact of a bolter round or the thermal damage of a melter weapon. The target experiences acoustic destruction, the physical structure of the target's body disrupted by the sound's vibration, the cells disaggregating, the tissues separating, the body coming apart at the molecular level through the application of sound at frequencies the molecular structure cannot sustain. The Doom Siren is the Noise Marine's close-range weapon, a device mounted on the Marine's armor that produces a concentrated acoustic blast whose area of effect encompasses everything within the device's projection cone. The Doom Siren's output is not targeted the way the sonic blaster's beam is targeted. The Doom Siren's output is broadcast, the sound filling the space around the Noise Marine with the destructive acoustic energy that everything within the space absorbs. The Blastmaster is the Noise Marine's heavy weapon, a crew-served instrument whose output exceeds the sonic blasters by a margin proportional to the weapon's size. The Blastmaster can be tuned, the weapon's frequency adjusted to produce the acoustic profile the tactical situation demands. A low-frequency setting produces the vibration that disaggregates fortifications. A high-frequency setting produces the resonance that destroys biological tissue. The tuning is the Noise Marine's tactical decision, the weapon's versatility providing the response the engagement's conditions require. The Noise Marine's combat doctrine is unlike any other formations in the galaxy. The Noise Marines do not suppress the enemy through fire. The Noise Marines overwhelm the enemy through sound, the acoustic assault producing the physical damage the engagement's prosecution requires alongside the psychological damage the sound's intensity generates. The enemy who faces Noise Marines faces a wall of sound whose intensity exceeds the human nervous system's capacity to process. The sound producing physical destruction and psychological devastation simultaneously. The noise marines experience the sound they produce differently than the targets experience it. The marines whose auditory systems have been modified by Bile's enhancements and by the millennia of subsequent refinement perceive the sonic weapon's output as music, as the compositions the weapons produce through the medium of destruction, the harmonics of the acoustic assault processed by the corrupted auditory system as the aesthetic experience the system was modified to perceive. The noise marines hear beauty where the targets hear death. The same sound that kills the enemy feeds the noise marine. The acoustic output processed by the corrupted nervous system as the sensory stimulation the system demands. The distraction perceived as the pleasure the corruption has made the distraction inseparable from. The beauty and the distraction are the same sound. The perception determines whether the sound is music or murder. The noise marine perceives music. The target perceives murder. The sound does not change between the perceiving. This is the Emperor's Children's corruption expressed through the acoustic medium. The musicians who composed symphonies now compose destruction. The instruments that produced beauty now produce death. The aesthetic pursuit that defined the Legion's culture has been sustained through the corruption. The pursuit's quality maintained, but the pursuit's medium altered from the constructive to the destructive. The noise marine is the Emperor's child who has not abandoned the artistic impulse. The noise marine has redirected the impulse from the creation of beauty to the creation of intensity, from the composition of the harmonious to the composition of the overwhelming, from the performance for the audience's pleasure to the performance for the performer's sensation and the audience's annihilation. The redirection is the corruption. The impulse is the same. The Emperor's children have not lost their artistic nature. The Emperor's children have corrupted their artistic nature, and the corrupted art is the sonic weapon, and the corrupted audience is the battlefield, and the corrupted performance is the killing. The noise marines are the Emperor's children's most honest warriors. The marines whose weapons are instruments and whose instruments are weapons do not pretend that the war and the art are separate pursuits. The noise marines have merged the two, the artistic and the destructive, combined in the single act of the sonic weapons deployment. The beauty and the death produced through the same mechanism by the same being at the same moment. The merging is Slaanesh's perfection. The Dark Prince whose domain is the place where all distinctions dissolve, where beauty and horror, pleasure and pain, creation and destruction become indistinguishable, has achieved in the noise marines the merger the prince's nature demands. The noise marine is the being in whom the distinctions have dissolved. The noise marine is the art and the war. The noise marine is the beauty and the death. The noise marine is perfect, and the perfection kills. The sound echoes across the battlefields of the 41st millennium. The noise marine's weapons produce the acoustic signature that the Imperium's forces have learned to recognize and to fear. The specific, impossible, aesthetically structured and physically destructive sound that announces the Emperor's children's arrival on the field. The sound is beautiful. The sound is lethal. The two are the same. 10,000 years of corruption, and the Emperor's children are still making music. The music has changed. The audience has changed. The performance continues. What does an Emperor's child experience in the 41st millennium? The question matters because the Emperor's children are typically described through the lens of the horror they produce, the battles, the atrocities. The degradation the Slaanesh worship has generated across 10 millennia of practice. The horror is real. The experience behind the horror is also real, and the experience reveals something the horror's external observation does not capture. The Emperor's children are addicts. The addiction is the condition, and the condition is permanent. An Emperor's child in the 41st millennium lives in a state of perpetual hunger. Not the physical hunger that the biological body's nutrition requires. The Space Marine's augmented biology manages the physical with the efficiency the gene seed provides. The sensory hunger. The need for stimulus that the corruption has embedded in the Emperor's child's nervous system. The craving for experience that the nervous system's modifications have produced, and that the modifications' removal cannot address, because the modifications have become the nervous system. The hunger is for intensity. The Emperor's child, whose nervous system has been rewired by bile's modifications and by 10 millennia of Slaaneshi corruption, does not experience the galaxy the way an uncorrupted being experiences it. The ordinary stimulus, the light, the sound, the texture, the taste that the ordinary being's senses process as the environment's normal output, registers to the Emperor's child as insufficient. Flat, muted, the corrupted nervous system's threshold for stimulus has been elevated past the ordinary's capacity to satisfy, and the elevation is permanent. The elevation drives the seeking. The Emperor's child seeks the intense, the stimulus whose magnitude exceeds the threshold the corruption has established. The intense is the sufficient. The ordinary is the inadequate. The gap between the inadequate and the sufficient is the gap the Emperor's child's existence is devoted to closing, and the closing requires the stimuli the ordinary environment does not provide. The stimuli come from combat, from violence, from the suffering the violence produces in the beings the violence is applied to. The Emperor's child who fights, who engages the enemy in the close quarters, combat the Third Legion's doctrine prescribes, experiences the combat sensory output with the intensity the corrupted nervous system provides. The pain of the blows received, experienced as pleasure by the rewired nervous system. The sensation of the blows delivered, amplified by the modifications past the standard into the overwhelming. The sound of the combat, the weaponry's reports, the enemy's screams, the sonic weapon's cacophony, processed by the corrupted auditory system with a fidelity the uncorrupted ear cannot match. The combat is the feeding. The Emperor's child who fights is the Emperor's child who eats. The sensory experience of the combat providing the stimulus the hunger demands. The feeding is temporary. The satisfaction the combat produces fades. The hunger returns. The returning is the cycle's most predictable element, because the returning is the addiction's nature, and the addiction's nature does not change. The combat's aftermath is the withdrawal. The Emperor's child who has fought, who has fed on the combat's sensory output, experiences the aftermath as depletion. The sensory intensity recedes. The ordinary returns. The ordinary is insufficient. The insufficiency produces the craving. The craving produces the seeking. The seeking produces the next engagement. The cycle is the Emperor's child's existence. Fight, feed, withdraw, crave, seek, fight. The cycle does not end because the cycle's mechanism does not permit the ending. The addiction's neurological foundation sustains the cycle past every point the cycle's participant might have chosen to stop, because the choosing to stop requires the neural pathways the addiction has redirected. The Emperor's children cannot stop. not because the Emperor's children lack the will, because the will is the mechanism the addiction operates through. The will to pursue the intense, the same will that drove the pre-corruption pursuit of excellence, is the will the addiction exploits. The Emperor's children's will is exceptional. The exceptional will makes the addiction stronger, because the addiction is the will's application to the wrong objective, and the will's strength makes the application more effective. Between engagements, the Emperor's children seek alternatives. The combat drugs that the Slaanesh worship's pharmaceutical culture provides. The sensory experiences that the warband's existence in the eye of terror's warp-saturated environment produces. The music, the compositions the noise marines produce. The sonic art whose intensity approaches the combats but whose duration exceeds the combats. The sustained acoustic stimulation that provides the partial feeding the combat's absence demands. The alternatives are not sufficient. The alternatives are the maintenance dose, the stimulus that prevents the complete withdrawal the combat's absence would produce, but that does not provide the complete feeding the combat's presence generates. The Emperor's children between engagements are beings in partial withdrawal, sustained by the alternative's insufficient stimulus, driven by the hunger the insufficiency amplifies. The hunger makes the Emperor's children aggressive. Not the disciplined aggression the pre-corruption culture prescribed, the calculated application of force the tactical situation demanded. The desperate aggression of beings whose hunger exceeds their patience, whose need for the combat stimulus overcomes the tactical assessment the need should be subordinated to. The Emperor's children attack because they need to attack, because the attacking produces the feeding the need demands, and the need does not accommodate the delay the tactical situation might require. The aggression is the addiction expressed through the military. The strategic decisions the warband's leaders make are influenced by the hunger. The raiding conducted not when the strategic situation favors it, but when the hunger demands it. The target selected not for strategic value, but for sensory potential. The campaigns prosecuted with the intensity the hunger produces, rather than the discipline the campaign's objectives require. The hunger has made the Emperor's children less effective as a military force than their pre-corruption capability suggested they should be. The Third Legion's pre-corruption precision, the surgical application of force the culture's pursuit of excellence produced, has been replaced by the post-corruption intensity. The overwhelming application of stimulus seeking violence the addiction's hunger generates. The precision was more effective. The intensity is more satisfying. The satisfaction's priority over the effectiveness is the corruption's military expression. Fulgrim's daemon world is the addiction's ultimate expression. The planet that Slaanesh gifted to the daemon prince, the world whose conditions the prince shapes to the prince's desires, is the sensory environment the addiction demands, providing the stimuli the prince's elevated threshold requires through the medium the warp's malleable reality permits. The daemon world's conditions exceed what the material universe can produce. The colors are brighter, the sounds are louder, the sensations are more intense. The stimuli exceed the material's limits because the warp's reality does not observe the material's limits. And the daemon world is the warp's reality shaped by the daemon prince's will. Within the daemon world, Fulgrim replays his battles. The daemon prince whose pursuit of perfection has survived the daemonhood's transformation repeats the engagements his existence has produced. The cleansing of Laren, the duel with Ferris, the drop site massacre, the siege of Terra, seeking in each repetition the perfect execution the original did not achieve. The repetition does not produce the perfection. The gap between the achieved and the perfect persists, maintained by the gap's nature, sustained by Slaanesh's design. The perfection receding as the pursuer approaches with the inevitability that the infinite regress produces. The daemon prince pursues. The perfection withdraws. The pursuing continues. The repetition is the punishment and the pleasure simultaneously. The punishment is the perfection's non-arrival, the eternal frustration of the pursuit that does not achieve its objective. The pleasure is the pursuing itself, the sensation the repetition produces, the experience of the attempt, the stimulus the attempt generates in the daemon prince's corrupted consciousness. The punishment pleasure is Slaanesh's gift. The Dark Prince has given Fulgrim exactly what Fulgrim asked for, the pursuit of perfection, eternal, unending, the sensation of the pursuing sustained across the millennia without the conclusion the arriving would produce. The arriving would be the ending. The ending would be the death of the pursuit, the death of the sensation, the death of the being whose existence the pursuit has defined. Fulgrim does not want the arriving. Fulgrim wants the pursuing. The pursuing is the existence. The existence is the punishment. The punishment is the gift. And the gift does not expire. To understand the Emperor's children's fall, you must understand Slaanesh, and to understand Slaanesh, you must understand what Slaanesh offers that no other Chaos God can match. Khorne offers power. The Blood God's gift is the strength to destroy, the rage to fight, the martial capability that exceeds what the warrior's unenhanced biology provides. Khorne's offering is crude, the blunt instrument of violence, the hammer applied to every problem the hammer's wielder encounters. Khorne's worshippers are powerful. Khorne's worshippers are not sophisticated. Nurgle offers endurance. The Plague God's gift is the resilience to survive, the acceptance of the inevitable, the peace that the cessation of resistance provides. Nurgle's offering is comfortable, the warm embrace of the grandfather whose love is expressed through the disease the love produces. Nurgle's worshippers are tough. Nurgle's worshippers are not ambitious. Tzeentch offers knowledge. The Changer of Ways gift is the understanding that the galaxy's mysteries contain, the power that the understanding's application produces, the manipulation of reality that the knowledge permits. Tzeentch's offering is intellectual, the scholar's temptation, the appeal to the mind that seeks the answers the seeking produces. Tzeentch's worshippers are clever. Tzeentch's worshippers are not satisfied. Slaanesh offers perfection. The Dark Prince's gift is the removal of the boundary between the excellent and the ultimate, the promise that the gap between what the worshipper can achieve and what the worshipper can imagine can be closed through the methods the worship provides. Slaanesh does not offer power in Khorne's sense. Slaanesh offers capability, the refinement of the worshipper's existing qualities past the limits the unenhanced biology imposes, the amplification of the senses past the thresholds the senses' construction establishes, the intensification of the experience past the boundaries the experience's medium contains. The offering is irresistible to the being who pursues excellence, the warrior whose swordsmanship approaches the perfect, and who cannot close the gap between the approaching and the achieving finds in Slaanesh the method for closing the gap. The artist whose compositions approach the sublime, and who cannot bridge the distance between the approaching and the attaining finds in Slaanesh the bridge. The craftsman whose creations approach the flawless, and who cannot eliminate the imperfection the approaching retains finds in Slaanesh the elimination. The method is excess. The bridge is the abandonment of restraint. The elimination is the removal of the boundary the imperfection exists behind. The offering's irresistibility is proportional to the being's excellence. The mediocre warrior is not tempted by the promise of perfection in swordsmanship, because the mediocre warrior does not pursue perfection, and the gap between the mediocre and the perfect is too wide for the closing to seem possible. The excellent warrior is tempted, desperately, compulsively, overwhelmingly tempted, because the excellent warrior is close to the perfection the warrior pursues, and the gap's narrowness makes the closing seem achievable and the achieving seems possible, and the possibility is the temptation. This is why the Emperor's children fell. Not because the Emperor's children were weak, because the Emperor's children were strong. The strongest, the most excellent, the closest to the perfection the pursuit demanded. The gap between the Emperor's children's achievement and the perfection the Emperor's children pursued was the narrowest gap in the Imperium, and the narrowness made Slaanesh's offering the most relevant offering any chaos god could make to any legion. Khorne could not have corrupted the Emperor's children. The blood god's offering, power through rage, strength through violence, did not correspond to the Emperor's children's values. The Third Legion did not pursue power. The Third Legion pursued excellence, and the excellence was not the same thing as the power, and the distinction prevented Khorne's offering from finding the purchase the offering required. Nurgle could not have corrupted the Emperor's children. The plague god's offering endurance through acceptance, peace through the cessation of ambition, was the opposite of the Emperor's children's values. The Third Legion's ambition, the relentless, comprehensive, never satisfied pursuit of the better, was incompatible with Nurgle's embrace. Tzeentch might have corrupted the Emperor's children, but the corruption would have been incomplete. The changer of ways offering, knowledge, manipulation, the intellectual's temptation, addressed part of the Emperor's children's nature, but not the whole. The Third Legion's pursuit encompassed the intellectual but was not limited to it. Slaanesh corrupted the Emperor's children completely because Slaanesh's offering addressed the Emperor's children's nature completely. The pursuit of perfection, the comprehensive, all-encompassing, every domain-spanning commitment to the excellent, was the nature Slaanesh's offering was designed to exploit, and the exploitation was total because the nature it exploited was total. The Emperor's children were Slaanesh's perfect targets. The beings the Emperor had created to be the most excellent warriors in the galaxy were the beings whose excellence made them the most vulnerable to the god, whose domain was the place where excellence met excess. The matching was not coincidental. Whether Slaanesh targeted the Emperor's children specifically, whether the Dark Prince directed the Lair Blade's daemon toward the Third Legion, with the deliberate intention of corrupting the Legion whose nature corresponded to the Prince's own, is debated by the Imperium's scholars. The debate does not produce a definitive answer, because the Chaos God's intentions are not accessible to the mortal mind's analysis. The matching's outcome is not debated. The Emperor's children fell to Slaanesh. The fall was total. The corruption was complete. The legion that bore the Emperor's name became the legion that bore the Dark Prince's mark. The fall was inevitable, not in the fatalistic sense, not the predetermined outcome that fate had established, and that the Emperor's children could not have avoided. In the structural sense, the values the Legion carried produced the vulnerability the corruption exploited, and the vulnerability's existence made the exploitation possible, and the exploitation's possibility made the exploitation probable, and the probability's fulfillment made the fall. The inevitable is not the excusable. The Emperor's children's fall was produced by the values the Emperor's children carried, and the values were the Emperor's gift, and the gift's consequences are the gift's responsibility. But the Emperor's children made choices. The Primarch chose to claim the lair blade, the Apothecary chose to experiment with the lair biology, the Marines chose to pursue the sensations the corruption offered rather than the discipline the resistance required. The choices were the fall. The values produced the vulnerability. The choices exploited the vulnerability. The distinction between the values and the choices is the distinction between the condition and the decision. And the decision is the being's responsibility regardless of the condition the decision was made in. The Emperor's children chose. The choosing was the falling. And the falling continues. Slaanesh's gift does not expire. The perfection the Dark Prince offers is not achieved. The perfection recedes as the pursuer approaches. The gap between the achieved and the ultimate maintained by the gap's nature. The gap's permanence, the Prince's guarantee that the pursuing will never stop. The Emperor's children pursue perfection through excess. The pursuing does not end because the perfection does not arrive. The arriving would be the ending. The ending would be the cessation of the sensation the pursuing produces. The cessation would be death, the death of the experience, the death of the pursuit, the death of the being whose existence has been reduced to the pursuing and whose pursuing is the being. The Emperor's children cannot stop. The stopping would be the dying would be the end. The pursuing is the life is the punishment. And the punishment does not end. The sound arrives before the warriors. This is the first thing the defenders notice when the Emperor's children attack, not the visual of the approaching enemy, not the vibration of the assault vehicle's approach, not the tactical indicators the defense's sensors provide. The sound. A wall of noise that exceeds what the human ear was designed to process. The acoustic assault arriving across the engagement's distance before the warriors who produce it are visible. The sound is not music. The sound was music. Once the compositions the Emperor's children's pre-corruption musicians produced, the harmonies the Legion's cultural tradition prescribed. The sound is the music's descendant, the mutation that 10,000 years of Slaaneshi corruption have produced from the original artistic impulse. The sound is music the way a plague is health, the corruption of the original into the destructive. The beneficial transformed into the lethal through the amplification that removes the boundary between the two. The defenders clutch their ears. The sound's intensity produces pain, not the metaphorical pain of unpleasant noise, but the physical pain of acoustic pressure exceeding what the auditory system was constructed to withstand. The defender's eardrums strain. The defender's balance destabilizes. The defender's capacity to process the tactical information the engagement's prosecution requires is degraded by the sound's interference with the neural systems the processing depends on. The sonic weapons are the source. The noise marines, the Emperor's children's signature warriors, The beings whose weapons are instruments and whose instruments are weapons advance behind the wall of sound the weapons produce. The sonic blasters fire concentrated beams of acoustic energy whose impact produces damage that the defender's armor was not designed to address. Because the defender's armor was designed to resist kinetic and thermal and electromagnetic damage, not acoustic. The noise marines are beautiful. This is the detail the defenders who survive the engagement report, with the confusion the detail's inappropriateness produces. The enemy warriors whose appearance exceeds what the combat environment's aesthetic standards should permit. The Emperor's children fight in armor whose decoration exceeds the standard, whose colors, the pre-heresy purple and gold replaced by the post-heresy pink and black and the clashing pastels the Slaaneshi aesthetic prescribes, are vivid against the battlefield's muted tones. The beauty is the corruption expressed through the visual. The warriors whose pre-corruption armor reflected the Legion's commitment to the aesthetically excellent have maintained the commitment through the corruption. The aesthetic's quality sustained, but the aesthetic's direction altered. The beautiful replaced by the garish, the elegant replaced by the excessive, the refined replaced by the overwhelming. The noise marines advance. The sound precedes them. The defenders who are not incapacitated by the sound are engaged by the warriors the sound accompanies. The Emperor's children fight with a speed that the corruption's physical enhancements provide. The combat drugs, the Slaaneshi blessings, the Fabius bile-derived nervous system modifications that have been maintained and refined across 10,000 years of post-heresy development. The speed is extraordinary. The Emperor's children's pre-corruption speed, the product of the gene seed's standard Astartes enhancements, has been amplified by the corruption's modifications into something that exceeds the standard by a margin the defender's tactical doctrine does not accommodate. The Emperor's children arrive faster than the defenders expect. The engagement's tempo exceeds the defender's reaction capability. The defenders are overwhelmed not by numbers, but by speed. The combat is personal. The Emperor's children do not fight with the impersonal efficiency the Imperium's military forces employ. The Emperor's children fight with the intimate, engaged, sensation-seeking intensity the Slaaneshi worship produces. Each kill is experienced. Each wound inflicted and received is savored. The Emperor's children fight for the fighting's sensation rather than the fighting's outcome, and the sensation-seeking produces a quality of violence that the defender's experience of combat has not prepared them for. The defenders who survive the Emperor's children's assault carry the experience as trauma, not the standard trauma the galaxy's warfare produces, the fear, the grief, the physical and psychological damage that combat generates, the trauma of witnessing beings whose capabilities and whose beauty and whose violence operate at levels the witness's experience cannot normalize. The sound, the speed, the beauty, the violence. The combination is the Emperor's children's assault expressed through every dimension the assault encompasses. And the combination's totality is the element the defenders' training did not prepare them for. The Emperor's children take captives. Not all of the defenders are killed. The Emperor's children's interest in the engagement extends beyond the killing to the experiencing, and the experiencing includes the experience of the captive's subsequent suffering. The defenders who are not killed are taken. The taking is the engagement's continuation, the combat's transition from the battlefield to the Emperor's children's domain, where the captive's suffering will provide the sensations the combat's intensity began. The captives do not return. The defenders who are taken by the Emperor's children enter an experience the defender's imagination cannot encompass. and that the Defender's biology cannot survive for as long as the Emperor's children's methods will sustain it. The engagement ends. The Emperor's children withdraw, not through defeat but through satiation. The sensation-seeking warriors whose appetite the engagement has temporarily satisfied withdraw from the engagement's location with the same speed the arrival had demonstrated. The retreat conducted at the tempo the Emperor's children's anti-gravity vehicles provide. The defenders who remain survey the aftermath. The damage. The missing. The sound still echoing in the survivors' damaged hearing, the noise marines' weapons' acoustic residue persisting in the auditory systems the weapons have traumatized. The sound fades. Eventually, the memory does not. The Emperor's children's legacy is the sound, the weaponized music that the corruption produced from the culture's artistic tradition. The sonic blasters whose acoustic output kills, the doom sirens whose harmonics maim, the cacophonous symphony whose performance is conducted through the medium of the battlefield, and whose audience is the galaxy the performance assaults. The music was beautiful once. The compositions the Emperor's children's musicians produced during the Great Crusade were the Imperium's finest artistic output. The harmonies and the melodies and the sonic textures that the Legion's musical culture generated through the same pursuit of excellence the Legion's martial culture maintained. The music is lethal now. The compositions the Noise Marines produce are the descendants of the Great Crusade's harmonies, mutated through 10 millennia of Slaaneshi corruption into the weapons the descendants have become. The music kills. The music maims. The music produces the physical damage the sound's intensity delivers, and the psychological damage the sound's corruption generates. The connection between the beautiful and the lethal is the Emperor's children's most significant thematic element. The direct line between the Great Crusade symphonies and the Noise Marines' sonic blasters. The artistic tradition whose evolution from the beautiful to the destructive captures the Legion's broader evolution from the excellent to the excessive is the story's most concentrated expression. The same impulse, the same pursuit, the same drive to produce the most intense experience the medium permits. The medium changed, the impulse did not. The symphony became the weapon. The weapon is still a symphony. The performance continues. The audience screams. The Emperor's children's fall teaches the Imperium something the Imperium refuses to learn, and the refusal is the lesson's most dangerous consequence. The lesson is that corruption enters through the door of virtue, not through the door of weakness, not through the vulnerability that the weak present to the forces that exploit the weak, through the door of strength, through the excellence that the Emperor's children demonstrated, through the commitment to perfection that the Emperor's own name endorsed. The Imperium refuses the lesson because the lesson's implications are intolerable. If the Emperor's children fell because their virtues were exploited, if the pursuit of perfection was the vulnerability the corruption used, then every institution in the Imperium that pursues excellence carries the same vulnerability. The Adeptus Mechanicus's pursuit of knowledge, the Adeptus Custodes' pursuit of perfection in the Emperor's service, the Ecclesiarchy's pursuit of faith's purity, the Astartes' pursuit of martial excellence. Each pursuit is a door. Each door opens inward, toward the excellence the pursuit targets. Each door also opens outward, toward the excess the excellence's continuation produces when the continuation is not restrained. The Emperor's children did not restrain the continuation. The Third Legion's pursuit of perfection continued past the point where the pursuit's benefits exceeded the pursuit's costs, and the continuation past that point was the corruption's entry vector. The other traitor legions fell through different doors. The World Eaters fell through the door of rage, the martial fury that Angron's butcher's nails produced, the biological aggression amplified by Khorne's influence into the berserker madness the blood god's worship demanded. The Death Guard fell through the door of endurance, the stoic resilience that Mortarion's culture prescribed, the tolerance for suffering exploited by Nurgle's embrace into the apathetic acceptance the plague god's worship produced. The Thousand Suns fell through the door of knowledge, the psychic scholarship that Magnus's culture encouraged, the pursuit of understanding exploited by Tzeentchi's offerings into the sorcerous obsession the Changer of Ways' worship demanded. Each legion fell through the door its nature provided. Each legion's corruption was the amplification of the legion's existing qualities past the boundary, where the quality's positive expression became the quality's negative expression. The mechanism was the same. The doors were different. The Emperor's Children's door was the most tragic because the Emperor's Children's door was the most noble. The pursuit of perfection, the comprehensive, all-domain spanning commitment to the excellent that the Emperor's own name endorsed, was the most admirable quality any legion carried. The most admirable quality became the most exploitable vulnerability. The admirable and the exploitable were the same quality viewed from different angles. The Emperor's children demonstrate that the galaxy's greatest gifts are the galaxy's greatest vulnerabilities. The quality that elevates is the quality that corrupts. The strength that sustains is the strength that destroys. The virtue that defines is the vice that consumes. The demonstration has been ongoing for 10,000 years. The Emperor's Children's warbands, scattered across the galaxy, pursuing the sensations the Slaaneshi worship prescribes, are the demonstration's living evidence. The Noise Marine's sonic weapons, the corrupted artistry, the sensation-seeking violence, the permanent, ongoing, never-ending demonstration that the pursuit of the excellent, unconstrained by the discipline the pursuit requires, produces the excess the pursuit was supposed to transcend. The Imperium looks at the Emperor's children and sees monsters. The Imperium should look at the Emperor's children and see a warning. The monsters were the Imperium's best. The Imperium's best became the galaxy's worst through the mechanism the best's quality provided. The warning is this: excellence is the journey, excess is the destination. The journey becomes the destination when the traveler forgets that the journey has a boundary, and that the boundary's crossing transforms the journey from the beneficial to the destructive. The Emperor's children forgot. The forgetting was the falling. The falling continues. The Emperor's children among the other traitor legions occupy a position that the other legions regard with a mixture of contempt and unease. The contempt is the response to the Emperor's children's self-indulgence. The other legions, whose corruptions have maintained at least the structure of military purpose, regard the Emperor's children's abandonment of military objectives in favor of sensation, seeking as the evidence that the Third Legion has surrendered the warrior's identity the other legions retain. The unease is the response to what the Emperor's children represent. The other traitor legions see in the Emperor's children the endpoint the corruption produces when the corruption is not constrained by the military purpose the other legions maintain. The Emperor's children are what every traitor legion might become if the legion's corruption exceeds the legion's discipline. The warrior transformed into the sensation seeker, the soldier transformed into the addict, the military force transformed into the feeding organism. The other traitor legions constrain their corruptions through the maintenance of the long war's military objectives. The Emperor's children do not maintain the objectives. The Emperor's children have abandoned the objectives in favor of the sensation the objective's absence permits. The abandonment is the warning the other traitor legions perceive, and that the other traitor legion's discipline prevents them from acknowledging. The Emperor's children are the mirror the other traitor legions do not want to look into, because the mirror reflects the possibility the other traitor legion's discipline is designed to prevent. The mirror reflects. The other legions look away. The Emperor's children do not look away. The Emperor's children look into the mirror and see themselves clearly and find the seeing beautiful. Because the Emperor's children find everything beautiful, especially the terrible, especially the destructive, especially the things that were once excellent and that have become excessive, and that the becoming has transformed from the galaxy's proudest achievement into the galaxy's darkest warning. The warning persists. The warned do not listen. The Emperor's children continue. The pursuing continues. The perfection does not arrive. The pursuing is the punishment, and the punishment is eternal. The Emperor's children are the heresy's purest tragedy, and the purity of the tragedy is the irony the tragedy contains. The purest tragedy. Not the most devastating. The heresy's devastation exceeds any individual legion's contribution. Not the most dramatic. The Sons of Horus's fall is more theatrically compelling. The purest. The tragedy whose mechanism is most clearly defined, whose progression from virtue to vice is most precisely traceable, whose lesson is most directly applicable. The lesson is this: the pursuit of the excellent is the pursuit of the boundary, and the boundary between the excellent and the excessive is the boundary the pursuit eventually reaches, and the reaching is the moment the pursuit's direction changes from toward the excellent to past the excellent and into the territory the boundary was designed to prevent. The Emperor's children reached the boundary. The Emperor's children crossed the boundary. The crossing was the corruption, and the corruption was the crossing. Perfection is a direction. Excess is a destination. The Emperor's children pursued the direction until the direction became the destination, and the destination consumed them. The irony is the tragedy's sharpest edge. The Emperor's name, given in pride, carried in honor, displayed alongside the Palatine Aquila that no other legion was permitted to bear, is now the name of the heresy's most depraved legion. The Emperor's children are Slaanesh's children now. The name that was the honor is now the mockery. The Emperor's endorsement transformed by the corruption into the Chaos God's trophy. The Emperor gave them his name because they were perfect. Slaanesh took them because they were. What would the Emperor's children have been without the corruption? The question is the story's most painful element, because the answer was extraordinary. The legion whose pursuit of excellence produced warriors who were simultaneously the galaxy's finest soldiers and the galaxy's finest artists and the galaxy's finest scholars. The legion whose comprehensive commitment to excellence exceeded what any other military force has achieved would have been the Imperium's greatest asset. The potential is visible in the uncorrupted clone. the Fulgrim clone that Fabius Bile created. The copy of the Primarch as the Primarch was before the Layer Blade's daemon began its work, is the potential preserved in stasis. The being Fulgrim was. The being the Third Legion would have produced if the being had not been corrupted. The potential is extraordinary. The corruption that consumed the potential was the corruption of the extraordinary, the transformation of the galaxy's most noble ambition into the galaxy's most depraved pursuit, conducted through the channel the nobility itself provided. The Emperor's children demonstrate that the greatest virtues produce the greatest vices. Not through weakness, through strength. The commitment to perfection that made the Emperor's children extraordinary is the commitment that made the Emperor's children monstrous. The sensitivity that produced the art produced the addiction. The discipline that produced the excellence produced the obsession. The pride that sustained the pursuit sustained the fall. The connection between the virtue and the vice is not metaphorical. It is structural. The same neural pathways that produced the appreciation of beauty produced the appetite for sensation. The same psychological architecture that sustained the pursuit of the excellent sustained the pursuit of the excessive. The same quality, the refusal to accept anything less than the most intense experience available, drove the pre-corruption excellence and the post-corruption depravity. The Emperor's children are the warning the Imperium cannot afford to hear. The warning that the most noble ambitions carry the most dangerous vulnerabilities. The warning that the pursuit of the best is the path that leads past the best and into the worst. The warning that the being who refuses to accept mediocrity is the being most susceptible to the forces that promise the elimination of mediocrity's source. The warning has not been heard. The Imperium continues to pursue the excellent through institutions whose sensitivity to the excellent's corruption parallels the Emperor's children's own. The Mechanicus's pursuit of knowledge, the Ecclesiarchy's pursuit of faith, the Astartes' pursuit of martial perfection. Each pursuit carries the vulnerability the Emperor's children's fall demonstrated, and each institution manages the vulnerability through the discipline the Emperor's children abandoned. The discipline is the difference. The Emperor's children's fall was produced not by the pursuit, but by the abandonment of the restraint the pursuit required. The pursuit of excellence requires the discipline that knows when the excellence has been achieved, and that prevents the pursuit from continuing past the achievement into the excess the achievement's continuation produces. The Emperor's children did not know when to stop. The Primarch, whose nature was the pursuit of improvement, could not recognize the point at which the improvement became the degradation, because the degradation felt like improvement from the inside of the pursuing mind. This is the tragedy's deepest cut. The Emperor's children did not know they were falling. The corruption felt like progress. The excess felt like achievement. The degradation felt like elevation. The being who was descending believed he was ascending, because the sensation of the descent, the intensity, the novelty, the overwhelming experience felt like the sensation the pursuit of the excellent was supposed to produce. The Emperor's children fell upward. The falling felt like flying. The flying was the falling. And the landing was Slaanesh. Somewhere in the Eye of Terror, on a daemon world, whose conditions the daemon prince shapes to his desires, Fulgrim pursues perfection. The pursuit does not end, the perfection does not arrive. The repetition continues, each battle replayed, each engagement refined, each refinement falling short of the standard the repetition pursues. The Daemon Prince who was the Palatine Phoenix, the Serpentine Monster who was the Craftsman, the Four-Armed Horror who was the friend of Ferrus Manus, the being who bears the Emperor's name and who has made the bearing the galaxy's cruelest joke. Fulgrim pursues. Fulgrim does not achieve. The non-achievement is the condition. The condition is eternal. The warbands raid. The noise marines play. The sonic weapons scream across the battlefields where the Emperor's children fight for the sensations the fighting produces. The screaming is the music. The music is the weapon. The weapon is the art. The art is the corruption. The corruption is the pursuit. The pursuit is the being. The Emperor gave them his name. The name survives. The beings who carry the name do not resemble the beings the name was given to. The name is the tragedy. The name is the reminder. The name is the warning. The Emperor's children. The warriors who were given the highest honor the Emperor could bestow and who transformed the honor into the deepest shame the galaxy has produced. The pursuit continues. The perfection does not arrive. The pursuing is the punishment. And the punishment is eternal.